Chapter 550. The Abyss world was not completely in darkness. Living beings needed the guidance of light, and light was not a problem in the vicinity of the lava mountain. The endless mountain range was hundreds of meters tall, and it illuminated the surrounding area for dozens of miles. Along with the continuous sound of gushing and rumbling, lava flowed down from the top of the mountain, forming a narrow lava lake. The so-called narrowness was relative. Looking down from above, the lava lake looked like a small willow leaf, but the narrowest part was still dozens of miles wide. There was no sign of living beings above or near the lava lake. The unbearable high temperature formed a natural boundary. Other than the evil fire spirit and the dark dragon clan, other living beings would find it difficult to endure such an environment. Hanjin, Nicholas, and Ankiel were more than 10 miles away from the lava lake, but they could still feel the burning smell in the air. After standing there for a moment, their lips were already dry. Nicholas grabbed a handful of soil and rubbed it in his palm. He slowly said, "There's no aura of life. I really can't imagine how the abyssal races survive." "It seems like you don't understand the abyssal races at all," Hanjin said. Although Nicholas had already vaguely warned him, he did not seem to take Nicholas' threat to heart. He always spoke without thinking. "I don't have the time to understand those reptiles," Nicholas said coldly. In fact, he was a very utilitarian person. He was only interested in things that could affect him or decide his future. If Nicholas had been like Solomon, in addition to managing his own country and completing his self-cultivation, he would have learned or tried his best to understand everything that could be summarized with knowledge. Perhaps he would never have been as powerful as he was today. Even if he was a true god, his time and energy were limited. As the saying goes, if one specialized in algebra, it would be easier to become proficient in it. From another perspective, if Solomon were to focus on practicing magic, then his attainments in the field of magic would be far beyond what they were now. Unfortunately, Solomon was not someone who could be shaken, and his interest was not in magic. In order to ensure his own survival and to have more time to learn and understand, squeezing out some time and energy to practice magic was already a concession for Solomon. In addition to lava, there are countless underground rivers in the abyss. Where there is water, there will be all kinds of life. And Hanjin paused. "I don't know how to put it. They will form their own biological chain." "Do you understand? Biological chain? I can roughly understand it." Ankiel smiled. "Like the relationship between a wolf and a rabbit?" "More or less," Hanjin said. "Near the underground river, there are a large number of mushroom-like creatures. Some can even grow to dozens of meters tall, like a forest. They're the most basic life forms. There are magical beasts in our forest and in the forest of the abyss. Let's talk about which direction we should go." "What's the use of talking about this?" Nicola rudely interrupted Hanjin. "It's just idle chatter. Do you think everything you do has to be useful?" Hanjin glanced at Nicola. "You are too nervous." Nicola was speechless for a moment. He found that the more he interacted with Hanjin, the more difficult it was to deal with him. Every word he said could become a flaw. "Lord Raphael, are you not nervous at all?" Ankiel smiled. She knew how to balance things. Previously, Nicola was the one who had suffered, so now she had to speak up for him. "This is the abyss. To be honest, I'm also nervous." "No." Hanjin smiled. His smile was more or less repulsive. Of course, this was from Nicola's perspective. "Are you really confident that you can escape the encirclement of the abyss demons?" Ankiel raised her eyebrows. This time, she had decided to enter the abyss. It was a huge risk. The power of the domain could not be used without limit. Moreover, she was not familiar with the terrain, and there was not enough space for her to soar. If she was targeted by a large group of abyss demons, she might be in trouble. "I have dealt with them many times," Hanjin said. "I know them." Hanjin avoided the question. He did not want to be too direct. The powerhouses of this world thought that his Earthmeld was the protection of Mother Earth, and they had underestimated its effectiveness. Hanjin was really relaxed. In his eyes, the entire abyss was like a shadow. If necessary, he could easily penetrate layer after layer of the earth and rise to the surface. On the other hand, if Nicola and Anchial were trapped, they would really be done for. They would have no way out and could only fight to the last breath. Nicola and Anchial looked at each other. They were judging the authenticity of Han Jin's confidence. Han Jin did not speak. He lowered his head and thought about something. The reason why he had targeted Nicola so many times was that Nicola was trying to occupy the dominant position. After responding, there was no need to continue creating discord. In his heart, he admired Nicola very much. If it were him, Han Jin, who would dare to enter the abyss without any guarantee of retreat. Han Jin guessed that the battle in the Kingdom of Magnificent Light should be very fierce. Nicola could not do anything to Donald, and Donald could not defeat Nicola. However, the Abyss demons had unparalleled mobility. Nicola could at most protect a certain area. He had no time to care about other places. Perhaps Nicholas could not bear to see the grand light empire he had created suffer in the war. Thus, like a red-eyed gambler, he threw caution to the wind and resolutely decided to barge into the Abyss world alone to restrain the high-end combat power of the Abyss demon race. No matter what, he had to admit Nicola's bravery. At least, Nicola had shown the responsibility of an emperor. A king should never die in the end. That would be a disgrace. Enmity was enmity, and evaluation was evaluation. There was no contradiction between the two. The clearer he saw, the fairer his evaluation. When facing Nicola in the future, he would make fewer or no mistakes. The three of them were silent for a moment. Anchial was the first to break the silence. Lord Raphael, what are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe Donald is already waiting for us in Grave Valley City, Han Jin said softly. What? Anchial was stunned. They are more familiar with the terrain than we are. They also know that our destination is Lava Mountain. There are only 3 main roads in the vicinity, and the rest of the forks lead to meaningless places. Han Jin said, they can't possibly think that we are risking our lives to enter the abyss just to play hide-and-seek with them, right? Are you referring to the footprints I left behind? Nicola could not stand Han Jin's repeated attacks, and his tone became even colder. But this time, he had really misunderstood Han Jin. I also need them to make a wrong judgment. Han Jin lightly brushed over this question, and then said with a smile, So, my 2 lords, we will have to part for a while. Lord Raphael, what do you mean? Anchial was even more stunned. Han Jin did not answer. He took out a stack of maps from his spatial ring, flipped through them, and took out one of them. He handed it to Anchial. This is the map from Lava Mountain to Grave Valley City. The red line is the main road. Follow this main road, and you will reach Grave Valley City on time. Anchial took the map, looked at it for a moment, and then asked again, Lord Raphael, then, what are you going to do? Do you mean that we will meet in Grave Valley City? I have to interfere with Donald's arrangements. Otherwise, it will be too disadvantageous for us. Han Jin said slowly, I will leave through that Hell's Gate. Don't worry, I won't delay the meeting time. You're going to the Cursed Hill? Anchial was shocked. Raphael, didn't you say that the Cursed Hill has a magic formation left behind by Death God Hamas in the Age of Gods? Are you lying to us? Nicholas said coldly. They think that we will leave through Lava Mountain, so they will definitely let down their guard. They shouldn't be able to stop me. Han Jin smiled. He was too lazy to explain himself. Even if there is danger, I still have Life Golem, don't I? We can go together. There is no need for you to take the risk alone, Anchial said. In fact, I learned about the demons from an abyssal demon called Leonardo. He was once the leader of the Purple Flower of Hell. Han Jin spoke a bit slowly. So, I know better than you that this is their territory. We can't let Donald set things up as he pleases. Someone has to restrain his energy. Anchial quietly looked at Han Jin. It was Nicola who couldn't help but interject. Raphael, why are you doing this? He quickly understood Han Jin's intention. This was to cover for him and Anchial. The more powerhouses Han Jin could restrain, the less pressure he and Anchial would have. Nicola, do you think that you're the only man in the world? Han Jin's meaning was clear. You can take risks for your empire, but I can also sacrifice myself for the victory of the entire race on the ground. Humans were able to overcome all kinds of difficulties and gradually prosper. It wasn't because they fought for power or how artistic their methods of killing each other were, but because they could always unite wisely in the face of threats. Humans knew that they were weak, so they also knew that when it was time to compromise, they had to compromise and then face the enemy together. It was a sharp contrast to the dark and golden dragons who fought to the death. The dragons were too powerful and too arrogant. They always thought that even if they paid a huge price to get rid of their mortal enemies, they still had the ability to face any challenge. Hanjin always remembered what Grand Duke Solomon had said. As early as when he entered the gates of hell, he had already decided that he would have to take more risks. It wasn't that his strength was far stronger than Nicholas, but it was because his Tao was more suitable. Nicholas' eyes flickered. He wouldn't easily believe Hanjin's words, but he couldn't find a reason to doubt it. After pondering for a long time, Nicholas' mouth slowly revealed a smile. This is the Raphael I imagined. Hee, I'm starting again. You like me a little again? Hanjin smiled and interrupted Nicola's words. From a moment he and Nicola met, they were wary of each other, attacked each other, and fought to seize the initiative. From now on, all of this should come to an end. Hanjin didn't dare to say that they would definitely achieve great merits on this trip, but most of the miracles created in history required a prerequisite, the sincere cooperation of partners. Nicola laughed out loud, then quickly calmed down and asked in a low voice, "Is that abyss demon called Leonardo reliable?" Since Hanjin had already expressed his goodwill, Nicola wouldn't be stingy with showing his friendliness. He was reminding Hanjin that if the plan was built on an unreliable foundation, everything would become a mistake. The more he did, the more mistakes he would make. "I believe him." Hanjin smiled. Nicola frowned and was about to speak when Hanjin continued. "I know that if he had a choice, Leonardo would never rely on me. But because of some conflicts, he sent Donald's sons to me. How could Donald forgive him? There's no turning back for him. If this is really Donald's trap, the price is too high. You killed Donald's sons?" Nicola was shocked, then suddenly had a look of realization. "I was wondering why Donald—" Ha! At the end of his words, Nicola thought of something and laughed out loud again. And it wasn't because he was gloating, but because he thought of something very, very interesting. He laughed so happily that tears almost came out of his eyes. Enkiel's perfect red lips opened slightly as she stared blankly at Nicola. It was obvious that she had never seen Nicola lose his composure like this. "What are you laughing at?" Hanjin also felt that it was very strange. What he said wasn't that funny. Nicola finally stopped laughing and walked a dozen steps toward the lava lake. He then waved at Enkiel, indicating for her to come over. Enkiel glanced at Hanjin. If she wanted to maintain her neutral position, she shouldn't appear too close to anyone. But she was really curious about what could make Nicola lose his composure. After hesitating for a moment, she slowly walked toward Nicola. In the beginning, Hanjin and Enkiel chatted for a while, and Nicola seemed very dissatisfied. But now, he didn't have any awareness. He whispered to Enkiel for more than 10 minutes, and Enkiel's expression became more and more strange. After a while, Nicola and Enkiel came back. Enkiel could see that Hanjin was unhappy. Anyone who had been left alone for more than 10 minutes would be unhappy. Enkiel thought for a moment, then turned to Nicola and whispered, "Can I say it? No way, right? You're betraying me?" Nicola sighed. Enkiel ignored Nicola and smiled. "We didn't talk about anything else. We just talked about your past. I heard you have a very interesting nickname." "Nickname?" Hanjin was stunned. "You killed Dismark's illegitimate son, and after some time, you killed Dismark. You killed Zagun's son, and then you killed Zagund. It seems when fate decides who will fall in your hands, it always arranges for you to kill their children first." Enkiel was obviously trying to hold back her laughter. "So, Lord Nicola thinks that he has enough reason to predict that Donald will die in your hands, and he doesn't want to compete with you for this honor. And Lord Nicola has even more reason to predict that you won't be able to defeat him, because you didn't kill his heir, Prince Tinos. He said that this is probably the only time in your life that you've failed. Han Jin was speechless, and there was a helpless smile on his face. It was a coincidence, and he also hated that nickname. Nicola in front of him was really annoying. However, the fact that Nicola could joke about Tinos was a signal that they could let go of the past disputes, and at least for now, they would work together. What I said is the truth, right? Nicola shrugged, as if nothing had happened. Lord Ankiel, this is for you. Han Jin wisely avoided the topic, and then took out a ring from his space ring and threw it to Ankiel. This is... Ankiel caught the ring and asked suspiciously. That's too disrespectful. Nicola shook his head. In the Grand Light Empire, the ceremony of giving rings to each other is very solemn. Lord Nicola, we're talking about business, Ankiel said angrily. Han Jin pretended that he didn't hear anything. Put it on, and I can find your position at any time. Oh, Angiel put the ring on her finger and found that it was loose and large. The width of the ring was even wider than her thumb. It was clearly not prepared for her. This, Ankiel looked up at Han Jin. As long as you don't put it in the space ring. Han Jin said. Ankiel was right. The ring was originally prepared for Nicola, but Han Jin changed his mind at the last minute. Understood. Ankiel nodded. That's all for now. See you in Grey Valley City. Han Jin waved his hand casually, turned around, and floated in the direction of the castle like a wisp of smoke. Ankiel stared at Han Jin's back and said softly, this should be his plan. Yes, Nicola replied. What do you think of him? He is a rare opponent and also a rare partner, Nicola said calmly. That's it, not enough? Nicola asked, showing a cynical smile again. He was qualified to ask, and there were not many people in the world who could make him say so. Just as Han Jin had expected, the castle's defenses became lax, and only a few longhorned demons were cleaning up the battlefield. The corpses of their companions weren't important, but the great demons of the abyss were. The longhorned demons knelt on the ground, respectfully holding the messy piles of flesh and carefully placing them in the crystal coffins beside them. There is also the only intact relic left behind by the great demons of the abyss, the space magic crystal. In the abyss, no one dared to use a space magic crystal. It was an unforgivable blasphemy, and it would provoke the demons to come out in full force. And the space magic crystal left behind by the demons of the abyss could only go to one place, the morning hall of the demon palace. Soon, the longhorn demons carried the crystal coffins and walked towards the Hell's Gate. But when they were a few dozen meters away from the Hell's Gate, a figure suddenly rose from the ground. Chapter 551. Han Jin's appearance had long been known to the Abyss warriors. The longhorn demons immediately felt a chill down their spines and were at a loss of what to do. Facing Han Jin, there was no point in fighting or running away. They could only stare blankly at Han Jin. Han Jin gently flicked the long sword in his hand, and the crystal coffin lid suddenly flew up into the air, revealing the bloody flesh inside. Han Jin raised his palm and pressed it down. Boom! Under the impact of his powerful divine mind, the pile of flesh flew up like fireworks, and countless small cracks appeared on the coffin walls. The longhorn demons could no longer lift the coffin, and the crystal coffin fell heavily to the ground. Han Jin's fingertips probed into the fireworks, and a bright and full magical crystal appeared in his palm. He looked at it carefully and kept it in his spatial ring. Of course, he would not forget the legacy of the Abyss demon. The problem was that Ankiel's existence made him a little apprehensive. Ankiel was a member of the Dragon Clan, so she definitely had a magical crystal in her body. If you were to search for the magical crystal in front of Ankiel, wouldn't Ankiel feel sorry for him? As an intelligent life, most of them had their own pride and dignity. Would Ankiel tolerate such a thing happening in front of her? In order to defeat Donald, the three of them maintained a delicate balance, and Han Jin did not want to destroy it. Moreover, according to his plan, it would not be too late to retrieve the magical crystal later. There was no need to risk angering Ankiel. Under certain circumstances, a curve was often easier to achieve than a straight line. The Longhorn demons finally understood the purpose of Han Jin's visit, but no one dared to stand out and stop him. They continued to stare blankly at Han Jin. The 4 crystal coffins were opened by Han Jin, and the 4 space top-grade magic crystals fell into Han Jin's hands one after another. A satisfied smile appeared on Han Jin's face as he turned around and strode toward the gates of hell. Seeing that Han Jin did not care about them at all, the Longhorn demons did not know whether to laugh or cry. The danger was leaving little by little, and they appeared to be more careful, afraid that they would make any noise and attract Han Jin's attention. They even held their breaths involuntarily. The next moment, Han Jin disappeared into the gates of hell again. The Longhorn demons took a deep breath in unison, and a few of them could not stand still and fell to the ground. As the saying went, the wicked would always be met with the wicked. From their names, one could tell how vicious and cruel they would be when facing weak life. But in front of Han Jin, they were as obedient as lambs. On the other side of the gates of hell, Han Jin was in a daze for a short while, and his eyes took in everything around him. Just 4 to 5 meters in front of Han Jin, there were 2 abyssal demons who were also in a daze. They were in charge of guarding the cursed hill, and they did not expect a human to suddenly appear. Generally speaking, the job of guarding the cursed hill was very tedious and dull. There had never been a desperado among the abyssal races that dared to act wildly in the cursed hill. And the cursed hill was located in the Demon Mountain, and several thousand meters behind, it was the abyssal world's holy land, the Demon Palace. Rather than saying that they were guarding this place, it would be better to say that they were keeping up appearances. To put it more bluntly, those 2 abyssal demons were the doormen outside the hotel. Just a moment ago, it was said that powerhouses from the surface had already broken into the gates of hell. In just a dozen breaths of time, the Demon Palace's abyssal demons swarmed out and surrounded the cursed hill, waiting for the powerhouses from the surface to appear. But after waiting for a long time, there was no movement at all. Then Donald appeared. It turned out that the powerhouses from the surface did not dare to break into the final checkpoint and turned to escape towards the lava mountain. Donald returned to the Demon Palace and gathered the abyssal demons to discuss countermeasures, and the cursed hill became peaceful once more. Nicholas had gambled correctly this time. Donald did not dare to perish together with him. Without Nicholas, the Grand Light Empire would definitely not be able to resist Donald's attack. And without Donald, the Demon Palace would also be reduced to ruins by the sudden attack of the 3 heads of the surface. And Han Jin's timing was just right. He couldn't be too early, as the abyssal demons had yet to leave the cursed hill. But he couldn't be too late either. After Donald finished his arrangements, every region near the Demon Mountain would be on high alert. While Donald was deploying his troops, the Demon Mountain's defenses would be at their most lax. Of course, Han Jin was unable to guess Donald's thoughts. He dared to come in completely relying on the false Earth Corpse technique. At worst, he would just have to destroy one of his talismans and immediately flee. He would hide in a safe place and once again use the false Earth Corpse technique before coming out to cause trouble. The 2 abyssal demons reacted at the same time, their sickles emitting cold light, one on the left and one on the right, slashed towards Han Jin's shoulders. Then, a mournful howl tore through the black fog lingering in the sky and spread into the distance. Han Jin's figure moved to the side, and saber light blossomed with a loud bang. Because of his position and angle, the abyssal demon on the right side of Han Jin was the first to be attacked. He made the first move, and when his sickle was still a few feet away from Han Jin's shoulder, Han Jin's saber light had already arrived first, sweeping across his sickle. The seemingly incomparably tough sickle was quietly cut in half like a piece of paper. Han Jin's long saber continued to roll forward, cutting into the abyssal demon's ear and slashing through his eyebrows. The abyssal demon's head had already been split open, and the upper half of his head was sent flying into the sky like a pot lid. Blood splattered everywhere, and the abyssal demon's eyes instantly became misty, and his body softly fell to the ground. The remaining abyssal demon experienced the speed of Han Jin's attack. He didn't even wait for his sickle to fall and had already used instant transmission, appearing in the distance. However, he didn't run away and only stared at Han Jin with frightened and uneasy eyes. Han Jin gently raised his long saber, and with a puff, the tip of the saber pierced through the tumbling pot lid. Then, Han Jin's arm shook and the pot lid suddenly exploded. Han Jin reached out and grabbed the magic crystal that was still dripping with blood. He didn't have time to wipe it off and directly put it into his spatial ring. Then he looked around. The so-called Demon Mountain was not a mountain in the traditional sense. Instead, it was a giant stone pillar that was hundreds of meters in diameter and even more than 1,000 meters in diameter. It connected the high dome above and the soil below. The entire world was like a giant stalactite cave. In the deepest place where the giant stone pillars were densest, there was a palace-shaped building that was flickering with red light. Han Jin had seen many landforms of the abyss, but he had never seen such a tall dome of heaven. He roughly estimated that it was several thousand meters tall. The vast world should have given him a sense of relaxation, but those countless stone pillars made him feel particularly oppressed. Although that palace-shaped building was lofty and majestic, it seemed insignificant compared to the surrounding world. But for some reason, Han Jin knew that the abyssal palace was the center of this world. The soil under his feet was wriggling slightly. If Han Jin flew into the sky at this moment, he would find that the wriggling soil was actually composed of thousands of vivid faces. These faces seemed to be alive and were aging at a speed visible to the naked eye, and then completely disappearing. However, as soon as one face disappeared, another completely different face would appear. They kept disappearing and reappearing, and were constantly twisting. Some of the faces were even desperately opening their mouths, as if they were howling silently. Han Jin seemed to be attracted by the different scenery around him and completely forgot about himself. He simply didn't notice that the earth below his feet had already turned black and was slowly wrapping around his boots. The abyssal demon revealed a hideous smile. He held the scythe tightly with both hands and walked toward Han Jin step by step. The elite demon warriors who accompanied Donald on the expedition certainly knew how powerful Han Jin was, but for a doorman, his knowledge was too limited. Compared to the other companions, he was too young. He even forgot the fear just now and wanted to take the credit alone before his companions arrived. The black earth had already wrapped around Han Jin's knees, and his calves and feet had become thick and thick. In fact, the magic array left by the death god Hamas hadn't been activated yet. Absorbing the aura of life was just an instinct of the cursed hill. Han Jin sighed softly, took out a magic scroll from the space ring, and threw it out. The magic scroll floated more than 10 meters away and suddenly lit up. It instantly turned into a golden ball of light that was about 7 or 8 meters in radius. It was as if a sun had suddenly appeared in this world. Thousands of rays of light shot out in all directions like sharp arrows. Those were not ordinary rays of light, but a torrent of light that was much thinner than a cow's hair. They mercilessly lashed the ground, the giant stone pillars, and the abyssal demon. It was a forbidden light spell, God's revelation. The abyssal demon howled and threw away the scythe. He covered his eyes with both hands. Streams of blood had already seeped through the gaps between his fingers and flowed down the back of his hands. The thousands upon thousands of lifelike faces on the cursed hill were also attacked. The shattering of each face caused the soil to writhe furiously. With thousands upon thousands of faces shattering at the same time, the entire ground started to tremble crazily, as if there was a super powerful earthquake. Countless silhouettes shot out from the demon palace, constantly flickering as they rapidly approached the cursed hill. The abyssal demons had extremely strong mobility. They only needed a few breaths of time to arrive and surround the cursed hill. At this time, Han Jin had already put the 6th top-quality spatial magic crystal he had obtained today into his space ring. He then formed a hand seal, and a shrinking spell appeared in the distance. The abyssal demons moved quickly, but Han Jin wasn't slow either. The two sides quickly rushed out of the range of the demon mountain. Han Jin glanced behind him, and his figure suddenly shrank, soon disappearing without a trace. In just 2 or 3 breaths of time, several hundred abyssal demons had already surrounded the place Han Jin had disappeared. Donald slowly walked to the front and stared at the earth under his feet. After a long time, he softly sighed. If Zagund was still alive and Donald asked him about his feelings toward Han Jin, he would have definitely bluntly told Donald that it was a nightmare. Han Jin could not only teleport, but he could also use Mother Earth protection to disappear without a trace. In other words, if he wanted to kill Han Jin, he would have to kill him in an instant. But killing a demigod was easier said than done. Moreover, killing him once wasn't enough, he had to kill him twice. At this time, it was Donald's turn to experience the taste of a nightmare. While Donald was sighing, Han Jin had already walked out a mountain wall, holding his long blade and sizing up the scenery in front of him with interest. What kind of consequences would a traitor cause? A disaster. This would definitely be a disastrous disaster. What if it was a traitor on the level of Leonardo? At best, it could cause the collapse of an organization or a group of forces. At worst, it could decide the direction of a battle, or even the fate of a country or several countries. In order to win Han Jin's trust, Leonardo had racked his brains. Ever since Han Jin gave him the task, he had spent all the time and energy he could squeeze out to recall. 2/3 of the things he gave Han Jin were the information he brought with him when he decided to escape, and the other 1/3 were what he wrote and recalled in those days. Moreover, as the highest leader of the Purple Flower of Hell, he had a wealth of professional knowledge and accomplishments. In order to prevent himself from missing anything, he even began to recall everything step by step from the moment he gained Donald's trust, and no matter how big or small, he memorized everything. Leonardo knew that things that he didn't think were necessary could be of great help to Han Jin. Leonardo also made comments on the things he made. If he thought they were very important, he would write 3 stars in front. If it was important, he would write 2 stars in front. If it wasn't important, he would write 1 star in front. Leonardo's goal was to make it easier for Han Jin to browse through the information according to the time he had. The Demon Mountain and the Demon Palace were mysterious existences to all the powerful beings on the surface. Even if they entered the Demon Mountain, they might not know where they were. But to Han Jin, he knew everything like the back of his hand. If the heavens want to destroy, they must first make them crazy. With Donald's experience and knowledge, what could make him go crazy? The answer was in Han Jin's eyes. In front of him was a neat training ground. There were about 40 little demons holding metal scythes, charging and slashing at the targets in front of them. Abyssal demons at this age didn't have magic crystals in their bodies yet. If they recklessly used teleportation, it would be very detrimental to their development. Therefore, their training method was similar to that of the swordsmen on the surface. Although the demons were young, they had a certain amount of strength and momentum, especially when they charged forward with large strides. Their thick and hard tails drew deep grooves on the ground. Occasionally, they would hit a rock and sparks would fly from the impact. On the other side of the training ground, there were a dozen little demons laughing and watching the fun. Compared to their companions who were training, they lacked a thick tail. When demons reached adulthood, their tails would fall off. Then they would go to the demon pond to listen to the teachings of the god of death, Hamas. After being tempered in the demon pond and being polished day after day and year after year, they worked hard to make scythes with their tailbones. The scythes in the hands of every abyssal demon were made by themselves, and they were connected to their minds. When they had a satisfactory scythe, they would leave the demon pond. At that time, they would become true abyssal demons. Among them, demons who could communicate with the god of death, Hamas, will be specially trained by their clansmen. Unlike the Titans, the female abyssal demons were much more fragile. Their tailbones stopped growing when they were young, and the horns on their foreheads were very short. However, they were much more beautiful than the male demons. Although they were not very beautiful, at least they were not ugly. The little demons, sitting on the other side of the training ground, were the first to see Han Jin. They began to chatter noisily. The female demon who was in charge of looking after the children noticed that something was wrong and immediately turned around. When she saw Han Jin, she could not help but be stunned. The little demons who were training also immediately changed their target and stood beside and behind their teacher with their scythes. It was said that newborn calves were not afraid of tigers. This saying was very true. Not only were there no signs of fear in their eyes, but on the contrary, they gave people a feeling that they were up to no good. Your Excellency is... The female demon stepped forward and blocked the little demons behind her. She kept waving her hands behind her back, as if telling the little demons to leave immediately. Unfortunately, the little demons who thought that they were about to enter a real battle disobeyed her orders and continued to stare at Han Jin. "Honorable lady, my name is Raphael." Han Jin slightly bowed. He had learned this from Hal Lister. He noticed that the female demon was wearing an extremely luxurious headband that covered her short legs. The headband was inlaid with colorful treasures. It seemed that the female demon's status was not low. The female demon was stunned again. In just a few seconds, bean-sized beads of sweat appeared on her forehead. Obviously, she knew about Han Jin's background. Han Jin raised his head and looked around. This training ground was on the east side of the Demon Palace and was covered by a layer of darkness. He had already been here for a while, but the Demon Palace did not react at all. The long period of peace had greatly reduced the alertness of the demons. In fact, everyone had a hidden laziness in their hearts. After Jedis entered the Holy Crown City, he did not rush to set up a magic array in the Holy Church. It was not until the dragons attacked the Holy Church that he made setting up a magic array his top priority. Perhaps only by suffering losses could one learn a lesson. In other words, humans were slowly improving while suffering losses. They are still a group of children. The female demon said bitterly. Han Jin had already appeared here. Did they still need to think about what was going to happen? I know. Han Jin smiled and turned his gaze back to the female demon. If this place was the surface world, and a woman stood in front of Donald and told him that she only wanted to protect a group of children, what would Donald do? Ha! I come from the Freedom Federation. There are many cities there, and everyone was killed. However, not a single corpse could be found. That's because the Hellhounds won't even spare the bones. I admit that these children look very cute, but if I don't do anything, how can I face the victims? Before the female demon could speak, a little demon who seemed to be the leader let out a sharp roar. You dare to call His Majesty by his name? Bastard! I will cut off your leg and stuff it in your mouth. Let's see if you still dare to be presumptuous. Han Jin lowered his head and looked at his leg seriously. Then he shook his head. I was wrong. You are not cute at all. To be continued. If you want to know what will happen next, please go to www.chijian.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 552. Hughes, you take them and leave. Quickly. The female abyssal cried out anxiously, her face twisting and twitching. At the same time, she reached out to grab the eager little abyssal and pushed him to the back with all her might. Perhaps because they had never seen their teacher reveal such a sinister expression, the little demons were all stunned and didn't know what to do for a moment. You can shout louder, Han Jin said with a smile. He was hinting at her to call for reinforcements. The female demon suddenly roared. Her voice was abnormally sharp, giving people the feeling that it could pierce through clouds and split rocks. Even if she knew that her opponent had deliberately set a trap for her, she couldn't care less. Her shout hadn't even stopped when the little demon in the lead brandished his scythe and rushed forward. Clearly, he had misunderstood his teacher and thought that it was a signal for battle. With someone taking the lead, the other little demons naturally weren't to be outdone. They all roared and rushed towards Han Jin. It had to be said that these little demons moved very quickly. Even if the female demon wanted to stop them, it was already too late. Her face suddenly became deathly pale. Her figure moved, and with an even faster speed, she decisively passed by the little demons. She reached out and snatched a metal scythe from one of the little demons. Her figure then disappeared from where she stood, and in the next moment, she appeared in front of Han Jin. The metal scythe whistled as it chopped down on Han Jin's head. There was no anger or fear in the female demon's eyes, only deep grief. The outcome had already been foreseen. Han Jin's name was synonymous with nightmares among the abyssal demons. He was able to kill Donald's sons and even Prince Johnson. This kind of existence shouldn't be someone she could resist. However, she still rushed forward without hesitation. The pride of an abyssal demon wouldn't allow her to abandon the children behind her. At this moment, she wasn't afraid of death. The reason she was grieving was because she knew that Han Jin wouldn't let any of the children go. From the perspective of an abyssal demon, this female demon's actions were worthy of admiration. She knew that she would die, but she still pressed forward. This kind of bravery was rare even in the human world. However, this wasn't a battle in the ordinary sense. It was a life and death struggle between different races. What he had seen and heard in the Freedom Federation made Han Jin unable to feel the slightest bit of pity for her suicidal actions. Han Jin's figure flashed to the left, and at the same time, the heavenly Tao in his hand surged. A purple light blade more than 10 meters long swept out, and the female devil was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. She screamed as she was cut into two halves. Her upper body shot into the sky like a firework, while her lower body flew for 5 or 6 meters before finally falling to the ground. Blood gushed out of her body, leaving 2 red trails in the air. Following that, flowers of blood bloomed one after another, and the blood mist almost covered the entire field. The little demons that rushed over were cut down like straws before they could catch Han Jin's fast-moving figure. Everything happened too fast, so fast that they didn't even have the chance to regret. The remaining few little demons stared blankly for a moment before frantically screaming. They threw away the metal scythes in their hands, turned around, and fled. The little demons on the other side of the field were also scared into rolling and crawling as they fled. Han Jin's figure flew like a wisp of smoke. The blood that was falling from the sky was shaken off and scattered as if it had hit an invisible barrier a few meters away from him. He didn't chase after the escaping little devils. Instead, he stopped and quietly glanced at the playground. To Han Jin's surprise, there was still an imp alive at the scene. There was no longer any trace of arrogance on the imp's face, only extreme fear. The splashing blood was obviously beyond his ability to bear. He sat on the ground, motionless, as if he was scared out of his wits. Han Jin walked in front of that little demon and bent down to size him up for a moment. Then, with a flick of his wrist, a warm and rosy lotus appeared in his hand. Han Jin gently blew, and that red lotus slowly floated up and approached that little demon. Then, with a flash of red light, the red lotus miraculously penetrated into that little demon's chest. "Little guy, don't be afraid. It will be over soon." Han Jin smiled, then straightened up and swept his gaze over half a circle. The field was already covered in blood, and not a single demon could be seen standing. Han Jin walked in front of the female demon's corpse and bent down. When he stood up, a bright magic crystal appeared in his hand. Satisfied, he put the magic crystal into his space ring. Han Jin glanced at the demon palace towering under the black curtain, then turned around and disappeared into the mountain wall. At the same time as Han Jin disappeared, the figure of an abyssal great demon appeared in the middle of the field. The roar of that female demon was sharp enough that it was impossible for no one to hear it. Bright red blood wantonly flowed on the dark ground, and that abyssal great demon's feet were soaked in blood. The great demon that was famous for his ruthlessness and bloodthirstiness had suddenly turned into a statue that had lost its ability to move. Ironically, the reason for this change was precisely the bloody scene that the demon race liked to enjoy. After a long time, the great demon's head began to slowly turn, but its movements were still incomparably stiff. It seemed that just making such a simple movement had already exhausted all its strength. Finally, the great demon found that little figure in the pool of blood. It was that little demon that had once enjoyed a short period of luck. A trace of vitality suddenly appeared in the great demon's eyes, because it suddenly discovered that the little demon's body was in perfect condition. Could it be that he was still alive? The great demon forcibly suppressed the great happiness that came from escaping from death's door. It cautiously walked to the little demon's side, squatted down, and extended its trembling finger little by little towards the little demon. The great demon took more than a minute to complete an action that would normally take less than a second. When it finally touched the little demon's neck, the feeling transmitted from its fingertips clearly told it a fact. The little demon's heart was still beating, but the temperature of its skin was somewhat high. It let out a long sigh of relief, but when its line of sight shifted to other places, its heart instantly fell to the bottom. There was only one survivor. All the other children were dead. The great demon's lips trembled violently, and it suddenly raised its head. Extreme anger caused the corners of its eyes to burst open, and traces of blood flowed down. It issued an extremely mournful roar, and the extremely penetrating sound was like a muffled thunder, rolling along the dark sky into the distance. The rapidly flashing demons involuntarily stopped moving. Donald raised his head and looked in the direction of the sound. The heart-wrenching pain contained in the sound made Donald's heart sink. After a few breaths, the sky above the field thundered with a deafening roar. The deathly black curtain that had always been shrouded above the demon palace was also stirred up by the powerful sound waves, just like the surging anger in the hearts of the demons. However, even the surging anger could not change the fact in front of their eyes. Every demon, including Donald, was covered with a layer of gray color. Almost all the superior races were facing the same predicament, and so were the abyssal demons. They had always had difficulty reproducing, and there were only a few dozen little demons that could undergo preliminary combat training. At this moment, all of them had turned into messy flesh and blood. After thousands of years of recuperation, the demons had developed to an unprecedented level under Donald's leadership. The reason why Donald dared to set foot on the surface was that, on one hand, the church had been destroyed, and, on the other hand, the demons had enough new generation strength. It had to be known that before this, the number of imps that the demon clan had at most at one time was no more than 30. Therefore, Donald had every reason to think that the demons were at their peak. However, everything was destroyed now, and God knew how long it would take for them to regain their former glory. The abyssal demons roared and growled, and their bloodshot eyes wanted to do something to vent the grief and anger in their hearts that they could not suppress. However, they helplessly realized that they could not even see the shadow of the enemy. Hence, the redness in their eyes was gradually replaced by madness. There was even a demon who smashed half of the wall with a punch in a rage. Donald stood there motionlessly. To be precise, he had not moved since he appeared here. The tragic deaths of his sons, the fall of his biological brother, and the tragic scene in front of him had turned into thousands of poisonous snakes that kept gnawing at Donald's bleeding heart. Surprisingly, there was no grief on Donald's face. There was only exhaustion that seeped into his bones and numbness that was extremely mournful. The betrayal of the fallen angel Catherine had once made Donald fly into a rage. However, compared to the bloody scene in front of him, it seemed insignificant. What was going on? Donald's eyes were somewhat blank. He could not understand why things had turned out like this. Even now, he did not realize what the decision to set foot on the surface had brought to the demons. If Donald could calm down, if he could carefully analyze the current situation, if he could admit defeat, if he could be more decisive, then perhaps the best decision he could make at this moment would be to evacuate the demons from this place. The current demon palace was no longer a symbol of the demon's dominance in the abyss. It was more like a ferocious beast that had immense strength but could not move freely. It attracted hunters like Han Jin, who were everywhere, to wander around it, ready to add a bloody wound to it at any time. However, there are not so many ifs in the real world. Perhaps the deaths of his sons could not make Donald completely lose his mind. However, at this moment, something seemed to be quietly surging and growing in the depths of Donald's heart. This battle would not end until one of them died. Donald looked at the boundless darkness outside the demon palace and let out a soundless roar in his heart. Suddenly, an incomparably magnificent red light flew out from the chest of the surviving imp and condensed into a red lotus. The light soared into the horizon and even dyed the black sky red. Countless beautiful and dangerous petals fell from the red lotus and flew in all directions. The first great demon to arrive at the field was the first to bear the brunt of the attack. He was so close that he didn't even have time to teleport before his body was burned full of holes by the petals. The magic released by Han Jin was not a secret to the demons of the abyss. However, the problem was that this terrifying magic had appeared at the most unexpected moment and in the most unexpected place without any warning. Moreover, all the demons of the abyss had entered a berserk state and did not have time to react. "Be careful!" A lame great demon beside Donald roared and released instant transmission at the same time. Unfortunately, it was already too late. Han Jin's Red Lotus Hellfire could spread to a radius of 1,000 meters in a few seconds. Even if the demons of the abyss desperately released instant transmission, they would not be able to escape the range of the Red Lotus Hellfire in a few seconds. It could be said that all the demons of the abyss were doomed. The surviving imps turned into ashes, and the dozens of demons of the abyss nearby were also pierced by countless petals. Moreover, the sea of petals was rapidly spreading in all directions. Once the power of the Red Lotus Hellfire was fully released, the outcome was inevitable. At this moment, the rolling sea of petals suddenly stopped as if time had suddenly stopped. The warm and gentle petals quietly hovered in the air like an extremely beautiful picture. However, the demons of the abyss were not in the mood to enjoy the scenery. They immediately released instant transmission and escaped into the distance. Not to mention that the Red Lotus Hellfire could cause fatal damage to them. Staying in Donald's domain of death and decay would not be any better. Flames of madness surged in Donald's eyes. The space within 100 meters around him gradually dimmed, and even his figure was gradually swallowed by the darkness. In just a dozen breaths of time, Donald could no longer be seen from the outside. Only streaks of twisted purple lightning could be seen, as well as countless petals quietly hovering in the air. Compared to the color of Han Jin's heavenly way, the lightning of Donald's domain of death and decay was very deep and profound. Although their bodies were twisted in all kinds of strange ways, they gave off an extremely peaceful feeling. In other words, it was a kind of deathly stillness. On the other hand, Han Jin's heavenly way shone brightly and was full of vitality. Hundreds of demons of the abyss stood outside the domain of death and decay. They all had different expressions. Some were still in shock, some were angry, and some were trembling. They were still grieving over the tragic deaths of their children, but who knew that in the blink of an eye, they would lose at least 7 or 8 of their companions. This cannot be blamed on Donald. In fact, Donald's speed was already very fast. When the sea of petals had just spread out, he had released his domain and imprisoned the Red Lotus Hellfire. If there was anyone to blame, it could only be that Raphael for being too sinister. After an unknown period of time, Donald suddenly let out an angry roar. His voice seemed to contain an incomparably powerful force. The hovering petals were shattered one by one, turning into scattered specks of light. Donald did not need to do this. The Red Lotus Hellfire's effect was nearing its end. As long as Donald continued to maintain his domain, the Red Lotus petals would soon be extinguished. However, Donald could not control his emotions. He had to do something to vent his anger. At the same time, Han Jin jumped out of the ground outside the demon mountain. His body staggered, and a trace of blood slowly seeped out from the corner of his mouth. The imprisonment and destruction of the Red Lotus Hellfire had caused a huge shock to his divine sense. Not only could magic produce a backlash, but so could Tao arts. Donald's strength caused his expression to become serious. Of course, this injury was nothing. He just needed to find a place to rest for a while. Han Jin let out a long breath and sank into the ground again. On the field at the side of the demon palace, the atmosphere was gloomy. Hundreds of abyssal demons were staring at Donald. Although Donald could still maintain a calm expression, his heart had already turned cold. Han Jin suddenly broke into the gates of hell and attacked the cursed hill. That was nothing. Donald had seen through Han Jin's intention at the first moment. It was just to disrupt the demon's attention, create a threat, and try his best to restrain the demons to provide cover for Nicholas and Ankiel. Donald had already made his decision. He was prepared to leave his younger brother, Prince Han Jin, and a small number of demon warriors behind to deal with Han Jin's attack. He himself would lead the elites of his clan to Grave Valley City to surround Nicholas and Ankiel. Among the three powerhouses on the ground, Han Jin was undoubtedly the most difficult to kill, followed by Ankiel, and Nicholas was the target that he had to capture. As long as he could find Nicholas and think of a way to disrupt the spatial elements and make all the spatial scrolls lose their effectiveness, Nicholas would be in the bag. With the speed of the abyssal demons, they would not let Nicholas go until Nicholas was exhausted. But at this moment, Donald finally understood who was the most terrifying, the most difficult, and the one with the biggest appetite. Han Jin was not a wolf in charge of harassing its prey, but a lion hiding in the grass. As long as he found a flaw, he would immediately jump out and deliver a fatal blow. Donald felt a chill all over his body. Nicholas had broken into the Abyss world because he wanted to win the war, but Han Jin wanted to annihilate the entire demon race. Han Jin's actions came one after another. If he had reacted a little slower just now, who knew how many elite warriors would have been swallowed by that terrifying sea of flowers? Was this still harassment? No, this was a fight to the death. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. A few days later, Nicholas and Ankiel stood on a small hill, gazing at a towering city in the distance. This is Grave Valley City, right? Why does it look a little strange? Ankiel frowned her beautiful eyebrows slightly and said with some doubt. According to Han Jin, Grave Valley City was close to the Demon Mountain and was the most prosperous city in the Abyss world. But the huge city in front of them did not have any trace of prosperity. The tall city gates were tightly shut, and the city walls were densely packed with abyssal warriors. Although they were far away, Ankiel could still see the extremely nervous expressions on the abyssal warriors' faces. There were countless holes on the city wall, and from each hole, there was an arrow with a cold glint. They were like ferocious beasts that only wanted to devour people. Occasionally, a flying magical beast would recklessly fly over the city wall, but it would immediately be shot into a hedgehog by several arrows that soared into the sky. If Ankiel flew into the sky, she would be surprised to find that countless evil eyes and medusas were gathered on the crisscrossing streets of the city, including the roofs on both sides of the streets. Chapter 553. There was no sound in the huge Grave Valley City, and the atmosphere was so heavy that it was depressing. So many abyssal races had gathered together, but there was no sound at all. There was not even the slightest friction between their bodies. It was as if they had not moved since they stood there. No matter how one looked at it, this was a city that was armed to the teeth. It was just that the eerie silence had covered the city with a layer of lifeless gray. It was like an ancient beast that was about to enter its twilight years, silently waiting for the arrival of the last moment. Don't tell me Donald wants to have a decisive battle with us here? Nicholas stroked his chin gently, his gaze falling on a tall spire in the middle of the city. There was an abyssal demon holding a scythe standing on every floor of the spire. It seemed that there was something important in the spire that needed to be protected. Or rather, there was a person of high status there. The ring that Han Jin had given to Ankiel was tied to her fair wrist with a silk thread. Ankiel gently stroked the metallic luster of the ring with her fingertips. There was obviously a special reason why Grey Valley City had such a huge lineup. What she could not figure out was that Donald should know better than anyone else that these low-level abyssal warriors would not be able to harm a powerhouse of her level, even if there were 10 times more of them. In the face of a powerful domain, these seemingly strong abyssal warriors could not change their fate of being cannon fodder. Anchiel could even feel that Grey Valley City was emitting a strong will to die from the inside out. A strange thought suddenly appeared in her mind. The strange situation in front of her seemed to be related to Han Jin in some way. "What are you thinking about?" Nicholas asked curiously when he saw Anchiel's thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking that Grey Valley City should not be like this. It's not surprising that Donald would make such arrangements knowing that we were coming, although it's not very effective." Nicholas laughed, not taking the abyssal warriors on the city walls seriously at all. "That's the strange part. I always thought that Donald would be waiting for us at the Demon Mountain. After all, that's their home ground. Hearing you say that, I also feel that it's a little strange." Nicholas stretched his body exaggeratedly. As his body stretched, the bones all over his body cracked. But so what? This trash can't change anything. Nicholas had every right to say that. In front of his starry sky domain, there was no difference whether it was the strong minotaurs or the agile hellhounds. As long as they entered his domain, there was only death waiting for them. "But the demons have enough cannon fodder to provide cover," Anchiel said. "It doesn't matter. Those low-level warriors can't harm us at all, can they?" When he made the decision to enter the abyss with Han Jin, he was already mentally prepared to face the fierce battle that was about to break out, and the addition of Anchiel greatly increased his confidence. If Nicholas and Han Jin were to face Donald, who led hundreds of abyssal demons, and were likely to be at a disadvantage, then Anchiel would become a bargaining chip that could change the situation. It was not as simple as 2 plus 1. There was no sunrise or sunset in the world of the abyss. Under the cover of the boundless dark sky, Nicholas and Anchiel's figures appeared somewhat frail. The two of them patiently stood on a mound, looking at the similarly quiet Grey Valley City in the distance. After an unknown period of time, the ring on Anchiel's wrist suddenly lit up and emitted a soft light. "Seems like he found us." Anchiel smiled from the bottom of her heart. She admired Han Jin's courage very much. There had never been anyone who dared to enter the Demon Mountain alone before, and perhaps there would never be another in the future. Upon hearing Anchiel's words, the expression on Nicholas' face immediately became complicated. In terms of the overall situation, Nicholas sincerely hoped that Han Jin could return safely. That would greatly increase their chances of winning the next battle. But when he learned that Han Jin had really done this, Nicholas could not help but feel a strong sense of crisis in the depths of his heart, and a thick murderous intent filled his heart. As if affected by Nicholas' aura, the surrounding wind became stagnant. "What do you want to do?" Anchiel noticed Nicholas' abnormality, and the smile on her face gradually turned cold. Nicholas met Anchiel's gaze without yielding an inch. After a while, a cynical smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. He shrugged and said, "I'm a little conflicted." Anchiel, who was smart, naturally understood Nicholas' subtext. She looked at Nicholas vigilantly. "I hope you can stay rational." "Yes, rational." Nicholas sighed. "Damn rational. I've been thinking, is the biggest enemy Donald or Raphael? Can you give me an answer?" Nicholas' straightforwardness stunned Anchiel. In fact, everyone knew the answer to this question. In terms of individual combat ability, Han Jin, who had teleportation and ground guardian, was obviously much more difficult to deal with than Donald. Moreover, Han Jin had 2 lives. Since Donald and hundreds of abyssal demons could not hold Han Jin back, then even if the 2 of them attacked together, they would only be able to injure Han Jin. It was completely impossible to kill him. What did it mean to have an enemy who could never be killed? Anchiel could understand where Nicholas' murderous intent came from, but she could not tolerate it. "You shouldn't be asking me this question." Anchiel's gaze was as sharp as a blade. "At least, we all live under the same sky. With your wisdom, you should be able to make the right choice." "That's right." Nicholas sighed again. "Actually, what I want to say is, Anchiel, you're really different from the dragons. If it's possible, I'd like to be friends with you forever." "Friends?" Ankiel could not help but be startled. "We can enter the abyss together and fight side by side. Aren't we friends?" Nikolai shrugged his shoulders and fell silent for some reason. Nicholas's meaning was very straightforward. He hoped to be friends with Ankiel. This had nothing to do with the dragons. He only needed Ankiel's personal friendship. However, Ankiel was obviously pretending to be confused. We naturally included Hanjin. Otherwise, there was no need to emphasize that they had entered the abyss together. At this point, there was no point in continuing. Ankiel would never change her neutral position. In fact, it was precisely because of Ankiel's existence that Hanjin and Nicholas would cooperate. Otherwise, if two of them joined forces to squeeze out the other, the isolated one would definitely choose to leave. Finally, a streak of purple light appeared on the horizon, shooting towards Nicholas and Ankiel. "Too cool." Nicholas crossed his arms in front of his chest. His words surprised Ankiel. Based on her understanding of Nicholas, he was not someone who liked to praise his opponent, even if the opponent was his comrade at this moment. Could it be that this guy is worried that Donald won't be able to discover him? As expected, Nikolai's next sentence confirmed Ankiel's guess. "Why can't he be as low-key as I am?" Nicholas had a serious expression on his face. "You are indeed very low-key." Ankiel did not even look at Nicholas. She said in a bad mood, "The church has already been destroyed by your low-key actions. Perhaps you could be even more low-key." This was blatant mockery. Nicholas did not expect Ankiel to be so direct. He was stunned for a long time before a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Interesting. I actually saw the believer who is even purer than Jed's." "Believer? Are you talking about me? Are you speaking up for the church?" Nicholas said softly. In fact, when faced with Donald's pressure, he had thought more than once about how the situation in the Grand Light Empire would change if the Church of the Unsetting Sun still existed. The Knights of the Light who fought to the last breath, the High Priests who used their bodies to protect the unsetting Sun Mountains and the Holy Temple, would definitely release powerful combat power in the face of the invasion of the Abyss world. At least he would not have to take the risk alone. However, Nicholas was not someone who was willing to regret the past. He would also not admit his mistakes. "Do you know?" Nicholas continued. "Even Jed's, that honest man, has always maintained an unyielding attitude towards the dragon race. As a member of the dragon race, how could you treat the Holy Sea?" Ankiel opened her mouth, but didn't say anything. After a long silence, she said softly, "No matter how dissatisfied you are with the Holy Sea, it can't be a reason to destroy it. We are all children of this world, and we should learn to tolerate and give in to each other. Lord Nicholas, have you realized that you are too greedy? Perhaps in your eyes, there are only two types of life in this world. One is obedient, and the other is disobedient." This time, it was Nicholas's turn to be silent. His expression became very strange. After a while, Nicholas said slowly, "This should not be the legendary Ankiel. What should I be like?" Nicholas did not answer and only changed the topic. "The Abyss Warriors are also children of this world. You should tolerate them as well. Why did you enter the Abyss world with us?" "Because they want to destroy us." Ankiel shook her head. "When I say tolerance, I do not mean not fighting back or retorting. When I say modesty, I do not mean to turn people into lambs." At the end of her sentence, Ankiel suddenly laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Nicholas asked curiously. "I once met a very interesting young man and accompanied him for a while." Ankiel's beautiful eyes slowly narrowed, as if she was recalling something. "At that time, I asked him the same question as you did. Since he said that he had to learn tolerance, why did he have to kill those opponents? And he answered as you did, yes." Ankiel nodded. "It has been many years, but I still can't forget his shadow. Especially, I can't forget those eyes. They were clear like spring water, gentle like moonlight, full of wisdom, as if they could penetrate the soul." "He knew your identity?" "No, he was a fool. You just said that his eyes were full of wisdom." "How could it be?" Nicholas was really confused. In some areas, his talent is unimaginable, but in other areas, he becomes dull. For example, as an adult in his 20s, he doesn't know how to take care of himself. A few months before I left, he even fell seriously ill and left behind an incurable illness. Actually, that could have been avoided. Why did you leave? Nicholas asked as he pondered. He could see that the young man Ankiel spoke of had a deep relationship with her. Moreover, to be able to receive such an evaluation from Ankiel, the young man's name would definitely shake the world in the future. He had just recovered from his illness when he accidentally saw himself in the mirror. He realized that he had aged a lot in just a few days. His face was pale and haggard. Then he saw me. Haha. Then he asked me why my appearance hadn't changed even though we've known each other for 5 or 6 years. Ankiel said softly, I knew it was time for me to leave. Just because of that, his strength is improving very quickly. It won't be long before he can sense my power, so I know who you were talking about. Emperor Lando. Emperor Lando was the founder of the empire that had collapsed more than 200 years ago. According to historical records, although Emperor Lando had many concubines, he had never had an empress in his life. Perhaps it was because of Ankiel in front of him. You guessed wrong. Ankiel smiled. Let's not talk about this anymore. Raphael will be here soon. Apparently, the people of Grave Valley City had also noticed Han Jin's figure. Countless eyes were fixed on the purple light in the sky, but no one made any moves. The city was still as silent as death. The only thing that had changed was that a tall figure had appeared at the top of the towering spire in the middle of the city. From Nicholas and Ankiel's perspective, the figure seemed to have become one with the ink-black dome above. Although they were far away, they could still feel a mountain-like aura coming from it. A moment later, Han Jin landed in front of Nicholas and Ankiel. I'm not too late, am I? Han Jin said with a smile. His armor was still neat and tidy, and there were no traces of battle. You went to the Demon Mountain? Ankiel asked. Yes, I went to the Demon Palace to take a look. Han Jin nodded and looked at the figure at the top of the spire in the distance. He then smiled and said, Those guys actually came faster than me. It seems that they are really angry. The Demon Palace? Both Ankiel and Nicholas were stunned. They both thought that Han Jin had gone to the Demon Mountain. In fact, if it was just to contain Donald, Han Jin's activities in the vicinity of the Demon Mountain would be enough. However, no one thought that Han Jin would dare to go so deep into the Demon Palace. The consequences of doing so would mean that the risk factor would be multiplied. Nicholas pursed his lips and looked at Han Jin's face, trying to determine whether Han Jin's words were credible. Ankiel also looked at Han Jin in disbelief. After a long time, he sighed. Sir Raphael, I really didn't expect you to be able to escape unscathed from the Demon Palace. I have to say, your magic is really amazing. How could it be so exaggerated? I still suffered some minor injuries in the end, Han Jin said calmly. Only then did Nicholas and Ankiel's expressions return to normal. This was the only way to explain it. If Han Jin could really enter and exit a heavily guarded place like the Demon Palace at will, it would mean that as long as Han Jin wanted to kill someone, that person wouldn't have any leeway to escape. Are your injuries serious? Although no injuries could be seen on Han Jin's body. After all, Han Jin had shouldered the greatest pressure by himself. Hence, Ankiel had to express his concern. I'm fine now. At this time, Han Jin discovered that the figure at the top of the spire had disappeared. It seemed that the figure wanted to hide and wait for a fatal blow. You just said that he was really angry? What does that mean? Nicholas suddenly recalled Han Jin's words. It wasn't easy for me to go to the Demon Palace. I had to do something, Han Jin said with a smile. What did you do? Nicholas and Ankiel asked in unison. Something that should be done. Han Jin avoided the topic. But I can guarantee that we will face a crazy Donald. Nicholas and Ankiel exchanged glances. The atmosphere was very quiet. They knew that Han Jin would never boast about such things. Let's go and see what Donald has prepared for us. Nicholas's expression became serious. He took the lead and walked towards Grave Valley City. Ankiel followed closely behind. The two of them didn't choose to fly in the air. That would only make them an incomparably conspicuous target. Although it might not cause them any harm, the battle was imminent. Preserving a bit of strength might be the last weight in the balance. When Hanjin and the other two were about a kilometer away from Grey Valley City, they stopped at the same time. If they continued forward, they would enter Grey Valley City's attack range. At this time, the Abyss soldiers on the city wall also noticed the three of them. After a brief commotion, they calmed down again. Apart from tightening their grip on their weapons, they didn't do anything else. That tall figure appeared on the tower again. Even from a distance, Hanjin and the other two could feel that cold gaze. That's Donald. Hanjin couldn't believe it. With Donald's intelligence, he shouldn't be stupid enough to expose himself first. I don't think so. Due to the distance and the fact that the demons looked the same, Ankiel couldn't be sure. Nicholas pulled out his long sword with a backhand. A slightly evil smile hung on the corner of his mouth. He is Prince Hani. But who cares who he is? We'll just kill him. The three of them looked at each other and took action at the same time. Hanjin's figure disappeared from where he stood, while Nikolai strode toward Grey Valley City. His heavy footsteps made a thunderous sound on the ground and stirred up a cloud of dust behind him. Chapter 554. Ankiel's speed was even faster. She flew over Nicholas's head, her white battle dress fluttering in the wind. She was even pulled into a straight line by the air resistance, but her figure was not affected at all. She shot straight towards the city gate of Grey Valley City, leaving behind a series of afterimages in the air. The thousands of holes on the city wall lit up with cold light at the same time. Thousands of arrows shot out like a huge board of nails towards Nikolai and Ankiel. However, such an attack was negligible to a powerful being with a domain. As soon as the arrow was within 5 meters of Ankiel, it would abruptly stop in midair. The entire arrow would be covered in sparkling ice and shattered into countless fragments under the pressure of the wind generated by Ankiel's actions. Specks of starlight lit up around Nikolai. Countless specks of starlight danced in the air, drawing strange and unpredictable trajectories. Once the arrows entered the range of the dancing starlight, they were all bounced back without exception. The first one to reach the top of the city wall was Hanjin. A distance of 1,000 meters only took him a few flashes. The moment he appeared at the top of the city wall, the long saber in his hand suddenly released a stream of light that swept across the Abyss soldiers like a water curtain. The curtains of a bloody massacre had been raised. Many of the Abyss soldiers did not even have time to raise their weapons before they fell into a pool of blood. However, there were still countless minotaurs and long-horned demons with bloodshot eyes who rushed towards Hanjin. Some of the minotaurs even threw out their giant axes with all their might after being cut in half, as if they would be satisfied as long as they could cause a little damage to Hanjin. However, this little wish of theirs was destined to never come true. They could only lie on the ground with unwilling eyes, twitching as they waited for death to come. Ankiel appeared on the city wall 100 meters to the right of Hanjin. Compared to Hanjin, Ankiel's fighting style was much gentler. Facing the swarming Abyss soldiers, Ankiel slowly stretched out her hand. A blue light appeared in the center of her palm, and then the blue light quickly expanded. The aqua-blue brilliance instantly enveloped the space within dozens of meters. All the Abyss soldiers who were affected by the brilliance froze in place and turned into ice statues of various shapes. "Raphael, be careful," Ankiel cried out in a delicate voice. Grey Valley City was so large that it was impossible for it not to have a large-scale defensive magic array. Although a magic array would not be of much use to a demigod powerhouse, they still had to do their best. Since the magic array had not been activated and the three of them had been allowed to enter the city, there was definitely something strange going on. The Abyss warriors at the periphery were momentarily stunned, not because of fear, but because their companions were blocking their way forward. But after a short while, those who were still alive continued to roar and charge at Ankiel. They mercilessly knocked their frozen companions to the ground, causing the ice sculptures to shatter into countless pieces. It could also be said that they were the ones who killed their companions. Ankiel only imprisoned them and didn't kill them. Such a crazy scene made Ankiel instinctively disgusted. If they didn't even care about the lives of their own kind, how could these things be called intelligent life? Since that was the case, she might as well go all out. Ankiel's eyes were shrouded in a layer of frost. She stretched out her foot and lightly stomped on the ground. Immediately, fine cracks appeared on all the ice sculptures at the same time. As Ankiel slowly walked forward, her figure gradually disintegrated until it collapsed into countless pieces. Without any obstruction, the Abyss warriors at the periphery rushed up at an even faster speed. But none of them noticed that a thin layer of blue ice was rapidly spreading under Ankiel's feet like mercury. Everything that came into contact with the ice was turned into ice sculptures. Then, as Ankiel walked, crisscrossing cracks gradually appeared on their bodies, which then dissolved into countless ice crystals that scattered on the ground. Ankiel strolled on the city wall with an extremely elegant pace. Wherever she went, a blank space would appear. Wherever she passed, blue and red ice fragments would be left behind. Under Han Jin's heavenly axiom, none of the dead enemies could preserve their bodies intact. Blood had become the eternal theme. Viscous blood flowed freely on the greenish-gray bricks, and the ground was littered with broken limbs. It was a stark contrast to Ankiel's leisurely stroll. If Han Jin's heavenly axiom represented blood, then Ankiel's heavenly axiom was full of elegance, while Nicholas's fighting style was incomparably wild. They're the ones who should be careful. Before Han Jin could respond to Ankiel, Nicholas, who was laughing loudly, had already taken over the conversation. Nicholas crashed straight into the city wall. The Abyss warriors standing in the front row only had time to see a burly figure rapidly enlarging in front of their eyes. Then, as if they had bumped into a mountain, they flew up involuntarily. They lost all consciousness in midair due to the intense pain. Nicholas's feet stomped heavily on the ground, producing a deafening sound. With his landing point as the center, countless cracks as thick as fingers twisted and spread in all directions. The entire city wall began to tremble. Some of the weaker Abyss warriors could not even maintain their balance and stumbled into a huddle. Using the tremendous force of the recoil, Nicholas's figure rushed forward at an even faster speed. Not only would the Abyss warriors who were hit by him be thrown into the air, but the specks of starlight hovering around him also became deadly weapons. As long as the specks of starlight touched them, they would feel as if they had been hit by a heavy hammer. A bloody hole would instantly appear where they were hit, and their whole body would be sent flying by the tremendous force. For a moment, the city wall was filled with figures flying in the air. When they fell to the ground, without exception, they had all become lifeless corpses. Perhaps it was because the opponents were so weak that Nicholas did not even bother to use his sword, or because he preferred this kind of fighting style. Nicholas rampaged on the city wall in an extremely barbaric manner. Although the formation of the Abyss warriors was very dense, Nicholas's speed did not slow down at all. Instead, his speed gradually increased, and the direct result was that the number of Abyss warriors flying in the air rapidly increased. Han Jin waved the crescent moon blade in his hand, easily reaping the lives of the Abyss warriors. He even had the time to spare a glance in Nicholas's direction. The figures flying in all directions startled Han Jin. What were they doing? Flying in the air? At this time, Nicholas also noticed the large amount of blood spurting out from Han Jin's side. He secretly grinned. Is there a need for this guy to be so bloody? But in terms of the number of enemies killed, no one could compare to Ankiel. Once Ankiel, who had always been gentle and elegant, hardened her heart, the speed of reaping lives was terrifying. The range of the deep blue domain was too large. In just a moment, more than half of the Abyss warriors on the right side of the city wall where Ankiel was standing had disappeared, leaving only ice crystals all over the ground. As time passed, the number of Abyss warriors on the city wall rapidly decreased. Han Jin and the others were getting closer and closer to the inner side of the city wall. At this moment, there were only a few dozen Abyss warriors blocking Han Jin's way. Through the gaps in the crowd, he could vaguely see the scene in the city. The city was densely packed with evil eyes and Medusas. Although it looked scalp-numbing, Han Jin did not take them seriously. Although the evil eyes' rays were terrifyingly fast and powerful, as long as they rushed into the middle of them, they would cause chaos. The first thing to consider when shooting the rays was whether they would accidentally injure their companions. The time they hesitated was enough for Han Jin to kill the opponent in front of him. Against these guys with weak bodies, he could kill a large number of them with a single slash. Just as Han Jin was about to get rid of the dozens of Abyss warriors in front of him and rush into the city to start a massacre, a strong sense of danger suddenly surged in his heart. Without thinking, he immediately released the earth-shrinking spell, and his figure instantly disappeared from the spot. At the same time, countless light spots lit up in the city. Thousands of rays converged from all directions and landed on the same spot. A hemispherical ball of light dozens of meters in size appeared on the city wall, and the ball of light continued to expand. Soon, it covered an area of nearly 100 meters. The dozens of Abyss warriors blocking in front of Han Jin were instantly shrouded in a grayish-white light, followed by a deafening explosion. When the light dissipated, the dozens of Abyss warriors had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a huge gap on the city wall. Seeing this scene, Nicholas also slowed down the speed of his charge. Although he had the protection of the Starry Sky domain, he did not want to try the group attack of the Evil Eyes. The Evil Eyes' attacks were ineffective. Instead, they had killed dozens of Abyss warriors. However, this result did not make them feel dejected at all. The city was still deathly silent. The Medusas silently raised the bows in their hands and shot arrows at high angles. A rain of arrows immediately fell from the sky. The dense rain of arrows sealed off all possible corners of the city, enveloping Han Jin's group and the remaining thousands of Abyss warriors on the city wall. Compared to the rays of the Evil Eyes, this kind of attack was somewhat insignificant. It could not break through Nicholas and Ankiel's domain at all. Han Jin just stood there and waved the long sword in his hand, knocking away all the arrows that came close to him. However, the Abyss warriors were not so lucky. The arrows falling from the sky could easily tear through their tough skin and pierce deep into their bodies. However, these Abyss warriors did not seem to see this fatal rain of arrows. Even if they were hit by dozens of arrows, they did not seem to feel the pain. They desperately ran, roared, and waved the weapons in their hands as they rushed toward Han Jin and the rest. Most of the Abyss soldiers fell before they could even make it halfway, but those who survived didn't retreat. They braved the rain of arrows and bravely charged forward until Han Jin and the others took their lives. After the rain of arrows, Han Jin and the rest stood on the same spot, safe and sound. There was not a single Abyss warrior standing on the city wall. Such a cold and ruthless way of attack seemed to be silently declaring the firm determination of Grave Valley City to perish together with the enemy. Han Jin suddenly smiled. Looks like they're really going to go all out. I like it. Nicholas smiled. Ankiel, let's not hide anymore. How about it? What am I hiding? Ankiel asked indifferently. You know, Nicholas slowly pulled out the long sword at his waist and said, "Let me see the true, deep blue domain." Are you challenging me? Ankiel raised her eyebrows slightly. That's not wise. Just now, someone said that we live under the same blue sky. Isn't that right? Nicholas stretched out his finger and lightly flicked the blade twice. What I mean is, let's use those stupid guys as an experiment. You're using the sword of the prophet. When Anshir's gaze fell on Nicholas's sword, her pupils suddenly shrank. But she wasn't too sure. Good eyesight. Nicholas suddenly turned his head. When Han Jin heard the words sword of the prophet, he looked very surprised. Nicholas caught the change in his expression. Raphael, it seems like you're very interested in my sword? Han Jin shrugged. He really didn't know how to answer. Is it really the sword of the prophet? Ankiel asked again. Yes. Nicholas's arm trembled slightly. Suddenly, the long sword in his hand shattered into countless sharp metal shards that flew in all directions. The sharp shards streaked through the air, producing a shrill sound similar to that of arrows piercing through the air. Anchiel didn't move. When the sharp shards approached her body, they were quickly covered in a layer of snow-white frost. Their flying speed became slower and slower, and then they fell one after another. The corners of Han Jin's mouth rose slightly, revealing a smile. His figure flashed and disappeared from the spot. The sharp shard shot through the afterimage left behind by Han Jin and flew into the distance. When Han Jin reappeared, Anchiel and Nicholas both revealed astonished expressions, especially Nicholas, whose eyes became incomparably sharp. Although he was intentionally probing, the sharpness of the sharp shards was pitifully weak for powerhouses of their level. Han Jin shouldn't have used teleportation. There were only two explanations. Han Jin was deliberately hiding something, or Han Jin's defensive ability was very ordinary and he didn't want to expose it. Is it necessary to be so serious? Nikolai blinked. This is the sword of the prophet? Han Jin casually changed the topic. The sword in Nicholas' hand had already revealed its true appearance. The blade was more than 4 feet long, pure white and crystal clear. It was somewhat similar to the sword of light in the hands of the angels. Yes, Nicholas casually replied. I heard that you've already gathered the Lion King's shield, the glorious pendant, and the radiant battle robe. The saint's boots are already with Adolf, so it's already yours. If you can obtain the sword of the prophet, then you only need the oracle's crown to be able to grasp the law. Are you looking forward to it? Han Jin sighed lightly. Nicholas' personality was very aggressive, and his words were aggressive. The questions he asked were always difficult to answer. If he denied it, it would be too hypocritical, but if he admitted it, it would be unfavorable to the current situation. What? You want to give the sword of the prophet to Raphael? Anchiel laughed. The sense of coercion that Nicholas created was disintegrated by this sentence. He looked deeply at Anchiel. In fact, the sword of the prophet is not of much use to me. I can't release the power of the sword of the prophet. I like it only because it matches my identity. At this time, the Minotaurs and Longhorn demons below had already rushed up the wall, rushing towards Han Jin and the others like a tide. The powerhouses of the Demon Mountain are still unwilling to make a move. Well, let's see how long they can endure. Nicholas murmured, then I'll go down. You two can do whatever you want, but, Raphael, I still hope that you could be like a real man and not always find ways to hide yourself. After saying this, Nicholas's expression became particularly serious. The sword of the prophet in his hand slowly pointed to the sky, and then a thunderous roar resounded above the city. Galaxy! A sword radiance, condensed from starlight, soared into the sky. Immediately after, Nicholas's body suddenly became as heavy as 1,000 caddies. Like a heavy cannonball, he shot into the air at an incomparably fast speed, and then fell diagonally to the ground. The moment he jumped up, the stone slabs under his feet cracked, especially at the center. The stone slabs had already turned into extremely fine powder, and the rays that the evil eyes shot out randomly could only hit the afterimages that he left behind. When Nicholas's figure crashed onto the ground, there was a huge rumble. The sword aura that had expanded to the extreme slashed down like the Milky Way hanging upside down. At this moment, it gave everyone an illusion that Nicholas could tear down the entire sky with a casual wave of his hand. Boom! The sword light, which was hundreds of meters long, struck the street and extended straight ahead. Perhaps it was because Nicholas's movements were too fast, or perhaps it was because the ground of Grave Valley City was too soft, but there was no reaction from the surroundings, including the Abyss warriors, who were still standing there in a daze. However, time seemed to have stagnated for only a short moment, and then it continued to move. Boom, 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 boom. The hundreds of meters long street collapsed, and countless sand and stone dust soared into the sky. The houses on both sides were also instantly turned into ruins by the impact of the shockwave. At the same time, the Abyss warriors who were still on the street collapsed. They did not have time to react, and their bodies were crushed into pieces by the starlight that penetrated through them, turning into messy flesh and blood. One flower of blood blooming was nothing, and so was 100 flowers of blood blooming. However, when thousands of flowers of blood blooming in an extremely dense array bloomed at the same time, the scene could no longer be described as terrifying. The splashing waves of blood collided, merged, and whistled in the air. In the eyes of the Abyss warriors, the entire world seemed to have suddenly turned into a pool of blood. The street no longer existed and was replaced by a deep trench that was hundreds of meters long. The next moment, the falling flesh and blood made a hair-raising sound of collision and instantly covered the bottom of the trench. The ruins of the houses on both sides were dyed red by the blood of the Abyss warriors. In the end, countless twisted armors, weapons, and many unknown metal products fell down. Recommended book by a friend. Title: Immortal Tang. Book number 1712243. Introduction. Gao Yin, the youngest son of the Tang dynasty's famous general Gao Xinji. Because of his terminal illness, he was neglected by his family, and because of this, he escaped the calamity of his family's destruction. In the spring of the 15th year of Tianbao, Gao Yin stepped onto the path of immortal cultivation after his family was destroyed. The upper and lower 10 gates, the 3 palaces and 5 pavilions, the blessed enclave, the 9 cauldrons of mountains and rivers, ancient secrets, and the truth of 10,000 years. The same history, but different brilliance, composes a majestic and magnificent Tang dynasty. Chapter 555. Han Jin took a deep breath. Was this the power of a domain? With Nikolai's might, he could easily destroy a city with his sword. Lord Raphael, Nikolai is right. Unleash yourself to your heart's content. Don't disappoint us. Enkiel's eyes had already turned aqua blue. She left Han Jin these words before shooting down the city walls. However, Enkiel's fighting style had undergone an earth-shattering change. She had always been so elegant before, but now she was domineering. Her stern voice seemed to be mixed with countless invisible icicles, shaking the abyssal warriors' eardrums until they felt unbearable pain. Enkiel's figure then moved forward, crashing straight into an arrow tower. At this moment, Enkiel's figure was already enveloped in an aqua blue light screen that was 100 meters wide. She did not need to attack. The tall and sturdy arrow tower collapsed the moment it came into contact with the light screen. The dozen or so Medusas on the arrow tower screamed miserably as they fell down. The moment they or their bodies touched the light screen, they had already turned into ice sculptures. Enkiel continued to move forward. The deep blue domain that she released was like a huge bulldozer that was 100 meters wide. No matter what was in her way, it would collapse and shatter into pieces without a doubt. Enkiel's speed became faster and faster. She actually managed to forcefully open a large path through the layers of buildings that were scattered in picturesque disorder. Due to her speed and the extremely cold elemental flow, a considerable portion of the collapsed stones, wooden pillars, and bricks were firmly frozen outside the light screen. As Enkiel pushed forward, they continuously disintegrated and solidified into a single piece. By the time Enkiel had shot out several hundred meters, the frozen material outside the light curtain was already dozens of meters thick. The total weight had also reached a jaw-dropping number, but this did not affect Enkiel's speed in the slightest. Asterisk boom, 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 asterisk. Every time the light screen moved forward, it would emit a heart-shaking rumble, as if the earth itself was roaring. Behind Enkiel, there was already a large path that was 100 meters wide. The surface of the path was completely frozen and as smooth as ice. The Abyss warriors had no time to retreat at all. Enkiel had already charged into the battle formation where the evil eyes and Medusas were most concentrated. The next moment, Enkiel stretched out her hands and spread them outwards with all her might. Asterisk boom. Asterisk. Enkiel's domain exploded, and countless elemental energies swept out in all directions. A snow-white world rapidly spread out, but this wasn't the most terrifying part. The frozen objects in front of the screen of light that were dozens of meters thick also shattered at the same time, turning into countless ice shards of all shapes and sizes. No one could withstand such an attack. The bodies of the evil eyes and Medusas were torn into thousands of pieces in an instant. Then they were condensed and wrapped in the ice storm. Only 7-8 seconds had passed since Anchiel attacked and delivered the fatal blow. However, the area behind her and around her body had already turned into a forbidden zone. Thousands of minotaurs, evil eyes, and Medusas turned into ice shards in the blink of an eye. The ice storm continued forward, razing houses to the ground as if they were rotten wood. When the ice storm blew past a street, it actually uprooted the stone slabs that were deeply embedded in the ground. The ice storm swept out for 1,000 meters before the wind slowly subsided. Countless pieces of flesh, bricks, and tiles fell like raindrops. Nicholas and Anchiriel had attacked, instantly destroying an area of Grey Valley City. If they were given more time, the entire city would turn into ruins. Han Jin's eyes narrowed slightly. This was no longer a battle. It more or less carried the meaning of proving one's path. Are you a true powerhouse? Then do it for us to see. However, he knew his own situation well. The evil demon army, led by Donald, had yet to appear, and he didn't want to waste his energy. Just as Han Jin was hesitating, Nicholas and Anchiriel moved once again. The former's target was the tower in the center of the city, while the latter chose another evil eye formation. Anchiriel released the deep blue domain once again, and her figure shot diagonally. At this moment, something strange happened. A ball of extremely pale, almost transparent flame suddenly flew out of a house. The moment the ball of flame penetrated the wall, the entire wall melted at an extremely fast speed, turning into flowing dark red mud. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the ball of flame collided with the deep blue domain's light screen, causing violent ripples one after another. Amidst the crazy elemental vibrations, the ball of flame actually seeped into Anchiriel's incomparably tough domain. The next moment, Anchiriel flicked her fingertips, and a blue water droplet shot out, instantly penetrating the ball of flame. Another boom sounded, and the ball of flame exploded, turning into countless splashes of flames that were quickly extinguished by the extremely cold water elemental energy. Anchiriel's figure came to an abrupt stop. Her brows furrowed slightly, and she coldly looked forward. A figure slowly stepped out of the melted wall, stopping 40 to 50 meters away from Anchiriel, and quietly looked at her. It was a man in his 30s. Of course, in this world, appearances were very deceiving. Some people had lived for thousands of years, but still retained their youth. Anchiriel was one such example. From his outer appearance, the robust man looked very ordinary. His clothes were also very ordinary. He was neither tall nor short, neither fat nor thin. The only thing that stood out from the rest was his pair of burning eyes. Those were not illusions, but real flames. From time to time, a wisp of flame would rise up from his eyes as he blinked. "So it's you." Anchiriel's voice was somewhat strange. "Of course it's me." The man smiled. "What? You can't even recognize my dragon flames?" "You shouldn't be here, Valentine," Anchiriel said softly. "That's not strange. Do you still remember my promise? Wherever you are, I'll be there." The man looked up at the sky as he spoke. Clouds of black mist spread in the air and soon covered the entire Grey Valley City. "I already told you very clearly that I don't need your promise," Anchiriel said indifferently. She also saw the mist above her head, but she didn't have time to care about anything else because she was facing the strongest and most terrifying opponent in her life. The greatness of a promise is right here. The man in his prime, Pham Lunding, chuckled and replied, "I don't need your recognition either. I'm only doing what I should do." "After so many years, you're still as arrogant as before." Anchiriel showed a helpless expression. At the same time, Nicholas also encountered an abnormal situation. He was still a few hundred meters away from the tower, but a few figures had already flashed out of the tower, quietly waiting for him below. There were 5 great demons dressed in black battle robes. The straight horns on their foreheads were a symbol of their status. However, the sides in their hands were different from the other demons. They were bright red all over, as if they were pieces of red-hot iron. Han Jin's eyes narrowed, and he disappeared from where he was. After a few flashes, he appeared beside Nicholas and whispered, "Be careful. They're the demon generals guarding the demon pool." Demon generals? Nicholas was stunned. "Because most demons have a violent temper, I don't know which great demon king set an iron law. Every once in a while, the demons will select some elite warriors who can communicate with the god of death, Hamas, to guard the demon pool. They won't obey the orders of the current demon king, and they won't even leave the demon pool for the rest of their lives." Han Jin said slowly, "The advantage of this is that no matter if the current great demon king is stupid or wise, and no matter if he brings disaster or fortune to the demons, as long as these demon generals are here, the demons will never lose hope." "Then why are they here?" Nicholas asked. Han Jin didn't understand. Was it because he killed those little demons? "You know a lot. Did that traitor, Leonardo, tell you about it?" "It seems that you're Raphael." The great demon in the middle said slowly. "Ankiriel's situation doesn't seem good." Nicholas changed the topic. "I can see that," Han Jin said softly. "That should be Black Dragon King Valentine?" Nicholas hoped that his guess was wrong, but seeing the middle-aged man talking cheerfully and the slightly nervous Ankiriel, he knew very well that his judgment shouldn't be wrong. Other than the Archangel Alpha and the Archangel Catherine at her peak, it was difficult to say who was the strongest and most powerful among the powerhouses with domains. Each of them had different powers, and there were factors that restrained each other. Facing the demons, Ankiriel was the most important combat force among the 3 of them. Her deep blue domain could almost ignore the threat of the Abyss demons. Trying to teleport into the deep blue domain to attack Ankiriel was simply courting death. In this aspect, Han Jin and Nicholas could not compare to Ankiriel. If that middle-aged man was really Black Dragon King Valentine, the situation would take a turn for the worse with him restraining Ankiriel. Before Nicholas decided to launch a surprise attack on the Abyss, he thought for a long time. He thought of various factors, and even thought of the hidden forces that might exist in the Demon Mountain, but he didn't consider Black Dragon King Valentine. It was not that Nicholas was careless, but Black Dragon King Valentine's character was widely known. He was arrogant, ruthless, and vengeful. These were the true portrayals of Valentine. In other words, Black Dragon King Valentine's nature was definitely not as calm and polite as he appeared to be now. Therefore, Black Dragon King Valentine could not obey Donald's order to return to the Demon Mountain. He had endured for countless years, and when he returned to the surface world, his first goal was, of course, to destroy Dragon City and the Dragon Realm. Before this goal was completed, Black Dragon King Valentine would not shift his attention to other aspects. At the end of his thoughts, Nicholas sighed inwardly. Ankiriel's sudden addition had made him very excited. With Ankiriel, the possibility of success had undoubtedly increased by a lot, and they could even fight the demons head-on. Unfortunately, Ankiriel's addition was a variable. Who would have thought that this variable would lead to another variable? Black Dragon King Valentine had abandoned Dragon City and the Dragon Realm and appeared in Grave Valley City. He should have thought of this at that time. Nicholas blamed himself in his heart, but his expression did not change. No matter what he faced, even if it was death, he would not admit his mistakes. In the distance, Ankiriel flicked her fingertips again, and a small drop of ice dew appeared in front of her. "It's useless, Ankiriel. You can't leave." Valentine slowly shook his head. "And for so many years, I've been thinking about how to take revenge. I don't want and can't bear to waste time. But what about you? As far as I know, you had a falling out with the Golden Dragon clan and ran to the Lost Valley alone. What are you doing?" "Ankiriel, the gap between us is getting bigger and bigger. Don't always think that everything is under your control." Ankiriel smiled. "Who wants to waste time for nothing? I've learned a lot over the years." "Is that so?" Fan Lunding took a deep breath and said, "Then, let the facts prove whether or not your efforts can surpass mine." Outside Gray Valley City, hundreds of figures were rapidly approaching. Finally, Donald was the first to rush into Gray Valley City, followed by hundreds of abyssal demons. They stood on the ruins and the ice that had yet to warm up, forming a large encirclement around Han Jean, Nicholas, and Ankiriel. "Donald, do you really want to fight us here? Don't you want Gray Valley City?" Nicholas said in a cynical tone, leaning on his sword with one hand. They could be considered acquaintances, so there was no need to be polite. "It's still a good deal to trade Gray Valley City for Nicholas," Donald replied calmly. "You seem to have forgotten about those two." Nicholas was a little surprised. He pointed at Han Jean and then at Ankiriel in the distance. "Ankiriel belongs to Valentine and has nothing to do with me. As for Lord Raphael, I don't have full confidence in keeping him here." Donald seemed to be a very honest demon. He said what he thought. "As for you, Nicholas, you will become a tragedy. The outcome of this world war will no longer have anything to do with you. The space elements have become chaotic. You guys be careful." Ankiriel suddenly shouted from afar. "I know. That's why they haven't activated the magic array." Nicholas smiled, then looked at Han Jean. "Raphael, can you tell what that guy means?" "What does he mean?" Han Jean asked softly. "That guy is telling me that I'm the one in the most danger, so there's no need to continue fighting. I should immediately think of a way to escape." Nicholas's smile was full of sarcasm. "That guy is sinister because he always thinks of ways to attack your mind and weaken your will to fight. If you face him alone one day, you must be wary of his methods. Nicholas, you can't escape even if you have wings. Do I still need to use any methods?" Donald sneered. "You still don't understand me. Forcing me into a corner won't do you any good at all." Nikolai once again showed a cynical smile. "At times like this, I can often release the most powerful combat power, and even I am afraid of it." Donald was unexpectedly silent. He didn't refute Nicholas's arrogant words. "All right, let's not talk nonsense." Nicholas puffed out his chest and breathed a sigh of relief. "The two of you, no matter who dies here today, as a companion, I hope that you can make them pay the price. This is my only request." "Nicholas, are you discouraged? This is not like you." Ankiriel shouted. "It's not that I'm discouraged." Nicholas looked at Han Jean with a mocking gaze. "The point is, one of us has been trying his best to hide. Until now, I still can't tell how he could kill one powerhouse after another and even defeat the flame tyrant Lonker. Of course you can't tell. This honorable Lord Raphael is a powerhouse from another plane," Donald said slowly. Upon hearing this, Nicholas and Ankiel, who had always been able to remain calm no matter what kind of crisis they were facing, were dumbfounded. Even Han Jean was dumbfounded. Everything he knew about the Abyss demons came from Leonardo. If Leonardo didn't know, then he wouldn't know. How could Donald know about his origin? "Raphael, what that guy said, is it true?" Nicholas struggled to ask. His voice was trembling slightly. He had worked hard all his life, and his biggest dream was to break through the constraints of the rules. Perhaps this was not an ideal, but an illusion. But since he already had the realm, it was impossible for him not to fantasize. If Han Jean really came from another plane, he must have the secret to break through the constraints of the rules. Han Jin's brain was running fast. Donald dared to say so he must have grasped something. It would be useless to deny it. But how could he explain it? Moreover, once the information revealed by Donald spread out, it would definitely have a negative impact on the Holy Crown City group. A powerhouse from another plane was, after all, an outsider. It was likely to cause a sense of rejection. "Nicholas, you just reminded me that that guy is very, very insidious." "What? Have you forgotten what you said?" Han Jean said lightly. "Don't let your state of mind be disturbed. Did you see that?" He didn't dare to answer directly. Donald sneered. The reason why he revealed the truth at this moment was that the stronger Han Jean was, the more flaws he would expose. Donald never thought that he was the only wise man in the world. For example, Valentine had already suspected the origin of Han Jean. Another reason was that Donald didn't want to engage in a life-and-death battle with the three demigods from a surface world. Even if he could win in the end, he would suffer great losses. The best choice was to leave Anchiel behind, force Hanjin to leave, and kill Nicholas. This way, the price he had to pay would be the lowest, and it would be enough to determine the direction of the entire world war. Therefore, he wanted to create an atmosphere of mutual distrust between Hanjin, Nicholas, and Anchiel. That was easy to understand. When a warrior decided to leave his back to his comrade, and that comrade suddenly told him that he was not a human, but an alien creature, the fear and trepidation caused by the absolute unknown would not allow the warrior to leave his back to his comrade without any worries. Chapter 556. Do I have to answer you? Hanjin showed a mocking expression. Your guess is too ridiculous. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. He had to persist to the end and never admit that he came from another world. Did you hear that? What a feeble excuse. Donald sneered again. Raphael, you have mastered many different types of magic. Fire, earth, air, water, and even light. You can easily release any kind of magic. I have enough reason to think that you have mastered a very large magic system. But why have we never seen such magic before? We haven't even heard of it before. There's only one explanation. The entire magic system is a product of another plane. Idiot! The inheritance of the eighth element began in the age of gods. Hanjin's face was full of contempt. Just because you haven't heard of it doesn't mean it never existed. Although the expression on Hanjin's face was on point, he was sighing in his heart. He had no choice but to bluff. Suddenly, he thought of the eighth element. Since no one could explain the mystery of the eighth element, or even if it existed, he could only say whatever he wanted to say without leaving any loopholes. The eighth element? Donald was stunned for a moment, then burst into laughter. Lord Raphael, I have to admit that you are very humorous. It was the first time Donald had used honorifics in front of Hanjin, and it was obvious that he was mocking him. However, after laughing for a while, he slowly closed his mouth because Nicolay, Angel, and Valentine were all staring at Hanjin with their bright eyes. The debate about the eighth element had been going on for a long time. The mainstream magic world thought that the theory of the eighth element was absurd, but there were always some strong people who believed that the eighth element definitely existed. However, they all had different guesses about the eighth element. With a domain, one could be considered a peak powerhouse in this world. However, without exception, all the powerhouses who had reached this step discovered that they could not see any room for improvement, nor could they find the correct direction. Although their strength was still increasing bit by bit, there seemed to be an infinite distance between them and the critical point of breaking through the laws. Even if they had thousands of years to work hard, they might not be able to reach that step. To be able to have a domain, one must be outstanding in terms of wisdom, perseverance, and many other aspects. Otherwise, they would not be able to stand at the top. In their confusion, they were also reflecting. Why was it like this? Did he miss out on something very important? When Hanjin said the eighth element, Nicholas, Anchiel, and Valentine were all shocked. They even pricked up their ears involuntarily. They did not want to miss a single word, even if it was meaningless. All right. Donald paused, then laughed. Even if you're the inheritor of the eighth element, such a huge magic system is definitely not something that can be completed by a few people or dozens of people. It requires the lifetime effort of countless people. There's no reason why we don't know anything. If even you knew, then we would have been eliminated long ago. This time, it was Hanjin's turn to sneer. Who would eliminate you, all of you? Nicholas suppressed the agitation in his heart. There were two questions in his words. One was who would do it, and the other was all of you. Could it be that Hanjin was not the only inheritor of the eighth element? Some powerful beings would never allow us to know the secrets of the eighth element, Hanjin said softly, because it would be a threat to them. The atmosphere became deathly silent, and the demigods were all stunned. A poor person who did not know what to eat next would never worry about being robbed of his property. He would only think about how to make money and how to survive. Who would worry about that? Of course, it would be the rich. As for Nicolay, Ankiel, and the other demigods, they were, in a sense, the poor. They only thought about how to make themselves stronger, and as for what they would face after becoming powerful, they had never thought about it, as it was unnecessary. The information revealed by Han Jin was too reasonable and too perfect. It was said that once one mastered the eighth element, they would have the power to become a god. Who would be dissatisfied with this? They did not even need to think about it. They already had the answer. In order to protect our secrets, we even invented a language that belongs only to us. Han Jin said indifferently. He was not interested in fooling them to the end. Instead, he had to find enough evidence to prevent people from pestering him in the future. The next moment, Han Jin formed a spell, and lines of mysterious runes appeared in the air in front of him. The runes flickered quickly, illuminating the dark abyss world. This is the secret of the eighth element. I'll give it to you, but can you understand it? Han Jin said in a mocking tone. Things like words could not be easily fabricated. The structure, arrangement, and so on needed time to run in. In particular, Han Jin's runes had a very complex structure, and an ancient and mysterious aura assaulted their senses. Nicholas and the others were staring at the runes. Although they could not understand them, they tried to forcibly memorize them. Unfortunately, the runes were an incomparably cruel test. Even the simplest runes had to be carefully looked at for a long time to form an impression in their mind. Moreover, this was only temporary. They might not be able to remember it after turning around. What made them even more helpless was that the runes were being refreshed at an extremely fast speed. Even memorizing a single word was very strenuous. Wanting to memorize thousands of runes was simply wishful thinking. Very quickly, Nicholas and the others lost their confidence and shifted their gazes to Han Jin. It's precisely because I've mastered the eighth element that I can manipulate all the elements as I wish. Han Jin was speaking more and more without thinking. In fact, he had been observing the expressions of Nicholas and the others. He could also see that they seemed to be stunned. This was the source of Han Jin's courage. As soon as his voice fell, Han Jin formed a spell. A fireball shot out, followed by a water arrow. Then, he flipped his palm slightly, and a palm thunder blasted on a broken stone in front of him. The next moment, Han Jin smiled and clenched his right hand into a fist. Then, he suddenly opened it, and a white light suddenly bloomed. In the blink of an eye, Han Jin had consecutively released magic of fire, water, air, and light. His amazing control over the elements was fully displayed. Huh? Donald laughed dryly. Since the master of the eighth element has been deliberately hiding his whereabouts, why are you telling us so much? Because the time has come. There's no need to continue hiding, Han Jin replied with a smile. When? Donald asked. Don't you think you're asking too much? Han Jin's expression turned cold. But I can tell you that when Johnson was on the verge of death, he miraculously summoned the projection of death. Unfortunately, I already got rid of Hamas' clone. The atmosphere once again became deathly silent. Although the clone of a god only had a little bit of power compared to a true god, it still had the power equivalent to the laws. In the whole world, there was only one powerhouse that could contend against the clone of a god, and that was the Archangel Alpha. Could Han Jin really get rid of the clone of the death god? That was simply unbelievable. In fact, even the powerhouses who had personally witnessed the fall of the death god's projection didn't know what kind of power Han Jin's magic formation possessed. Taoism was about creating one's own heaven and earth, or borrowing the power of heaven and earth. Han Jin's yin-yang multiplication killing formation was about opening up a completely different heaven and earth that belonged only to him. Within the range of the yin-yang multiplication killing formation, Han Jin was above the laws and was the controller of the laws. Since the death god's projection had yet to fully take shape, it was unable to contend against the world controlled by Han Jin. Of course, Even if the Death God's projection was fully formed and had the ability to kill Han Jin with a wave of his hand, once trapped in the yin-yang multiplication killing formation, it would be restricted everywhere and the outcome of the battle would be unpredictable. Nicholas and Ankiel stared at Han Jin as if they didn't know him. In the past few years, this was the first time Han Jin had acted so insolently. In layman's terms, this daddy even got rid of the clone of God. So what do you want? What can you do? So, it's a character you created yourselves. My painstaking efforts were in vain. Nicholas revealed a helpless smile, and soon after, a talisman appeared in his hand. My magic guild has been researching it for half a year, but to no avail. So that's how it is. Where did you get it? Han Jin was startled. He naturally recognized the talisman he had personally made. It was actually the spirit refreshment spell. It's a secret. Nicholas smiled, and soon after, the talisman turned into a white light and entered his body. He hoped that he would be in his best condition to face the upcoming fierce battle. In a battle of life and death, perhaps Donald wouldn't give him such an opportunity. You? How is this possible? Han Jin was somewhat speechless. He had always regarded Nicholas as his final enemy, but only now did he discover that he hadn't correctly estimated Nicholas's methods. He had made many spirit refreshment spell talismans, but they were all for his most trusted friends to use. How could Nicholas have gotten them? Nothing is impossible, Yi Zichen said. Seeing Han Jin's expression, Nicholas smiled even more happily. For me, there's nothing I can't think of, but there's nothing I can't do. Donald's face was as calm as still water. He had wanted to create an atmosphere of mutual distrust between the three enemies, but who knew that things would go against his wishes? When Han Jin's true identity was exposed, Nicholas and Ankiel's fighting spirit seemed to be even stronger. Their teammate could kill the avatar of the Death God, Hamas, so what was there to worry about? They would just have to fight a vigorous battle. His original plan had also become uncertain. He and Nicholas were evenly matched in strength, and neither of them could defeat the other in a short period of time. Since Han Jin didn't seem to have a domain, the 5 demon generals guarding the demon pool should be able to restrain Han Jin, while Ankiel and Fan Lunding would become the most critical variables. Donald believed that Fan Lunding's strength would be able to gain the upper hand, and once Fan Lunding was free, no matter which battlefield he supported, it would become a one-sided advantage. But now, the variables seemed to have shifted to Han Jin. As long as Ankiel could hold on for a while, Han Jin would definitely be able to defeat his opponent, and Fantine would definitely escape, and the situation in Grave Valley City would be irreversible. Donald knew that this was what Nicholas and Ankiel thought, and it was also the fundamental reason why their fighting spirit had become so strong. Could the 5 demon generals really compete with Han Jin? Donald wasn't sure. Damn it, if the battle had started a day later, and Denver had arrived with his disciples, even if Han Jin was really the inheritor of the 8th element, he wouldn't be afraid. Nicholas smiled and stretched his body, then sheathed his long sword. At this time, an abyssal demon in the distance suddenly laughed hysterically. Look, everyone! That guy actually put his long sword back. Is he surrendering? At this time, the abyssal demon had no place to speak, but there were 5 demigod masters gathered in Grey Valley City. Han Jin could be ignored for the time being, as he always kept a low profile, and because of this, he was repeatedly ridiculed by Nicholas. The other 4 demigod masters emitted a mixed pressure that became stronger and stronger, especially Nicholas, who had decided to take the initiative to attack. The divine light shooting out of his eyes was almost tangible. Although it couldn't be seen, every abyssal demon could clearly feel the aura emanating from Nicholas' body. The abyssal demon was already somewhat out of his mind. The corners of Nicholas' mouth curled up. His right palm was like the edge of a sword, and he gently waved it at the abyssal demon. A sword light condensed from starlight shot out and penetrated the abyssal demon's nose. Nicholas's movements were too fast. Even compared to the terrifying attack power of the fallen angel Catherine, he was only a little slower. Although the abyssal demons could instantly release teleportation, there were always several steps to it. First, they had to see the enemy's attack, determine whether the enemy's attack power would be a threat, and then lock onto a space and release a space jump. They couldn't just jump randomly after seeing the enemy move casually. They were abyssal demons, not panicked rabbits. Perhaps these steps could be completed in the blink of an eye, but Nicholas's sword light was faster than that. Puff! The sword light pierced through the abyssal demon's head and continued to shoot forward. It broke through walls and flew straight for 500 or 600 meters before disappearing into the air. The abyssal demon's nose had completely disappeared, and in its place was a bloody hole. However, his eyes and mouth were undamaged. The scene was very strange. Then his body swayed and fell down. I saw it. I didn't lie. This is just a decoration. Nicholas smiled and patted his scabbard. I didn't need it a long time ago. Hundreds of abyssal demons clenched their scythes at the same time, but they didn't move forward. On the contrary, they slowly retreated into the distance. Unless they received Donald's order, they wouldn't participate in the battle. Raphael, don't let us down. Enchantment shouted. I also mean that. Raphael, don't fool us anymore. Nicholas tilted his head and looked at Hanjin. From the time they had gathered until now, Hanjin's strength was definitely not what the rumors said. This made him very unhappy, but he couldn't say anything. Hanjin wouldn't listen even if he did. However, at this moment, if Hanjin still wanted to hide his strength, then he would be putting him and Ankiel to death. Okay, Hanjin replied casually. His eyelids slowly sank, but his vital energy was still running crazily. At that time, he had said to Green that even if Nicholas didn't keep his promise, he would still enter the Abyss world alone. That was true, and he had made sufficient preparations for this. When Hanjin opened his eyes again, his pupils had become a dazzling gold. Around his body, the air shook violently. Then, strands of scattered golden light condensed and rolled. A moment later, a golden figure about 10 meters tall appeared behind Hanjin. The fog in the sky seemed to be affected as well. It kept twisting in shape. The next moment, the golden figure slowly opened his eyes. Then, a pillar of lightning dozens of meters thick suddenly drilled out of the black fog and smashed straight at Hanjin. Boom! The violent explosion shook the entire Gray Valley city. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere. With Hanjin as the center, the ruins within a radius of dozens of meters were once again ravaged. The pebbles were blown into powder, the stones were turned into sand, and the wooden pillars were burned into ashes in the blink of an eye. Obviously, the electric pillar contained an unimaginable temperature. Although Nicholas released his territory in time to protect himself, he was still shocked. He stared at Hanjin, dumbfounded. A rotating electric vortex cloud ignored the black fog and quietly floated in the sky. None of the spells that Hanjin had released before had caused any magic waves. But the electric vortex cloud was emitting an unparalleled power that could make all living things bow their heads. Even the demigods in Gray Valley City couldn't help but feel their hearts palpitate, and their faces were filled with astonishment. However, the vortex cloud only hovered for a few breaths of time before it slowly disappeared. Nicholas turned his head. Raphael, what are you doing? He did not know how to express his thoughts. He had never seen such a ridiculous thing. Did he release a spell on himself to test its power? Set an example. Hanjin raised his head and quietly looked at the vortex cloud that was slowly disappearing. The golden figure also raised his head. Of course, Nicholas did not know that some things would touch the bottom line of heaven and earth. In the words of this world, it was the law, so it would trigger a heavenly tribulation. Fortunately, there was only one. The golden figure was particularly clear. Even a pair of handsome eyebrows could be seen clearly. Hanjin. That's right, he was another living Hanjin. Hanjin blinked, and the figure also blinked. Hanjin smiled, and the figure also smiled. Not only were their actions exactly the same, but the figure also held a long sword in his hand, the Lion King's shield on his left arm, the glorious pendant hanging in front of his chest, the dragon scale armor, and a thick cloak. What did Hanjin have? The figure also had something, except that it was dozens of times bigger and was golden in color. This was the indestructible golden body that Han Jin wanted to refine in the end. The real indestructible golden body could resist the heavenly tribulation above and the three disasters below. The more refined it was, the more powerful it would be. As long as the golden body was not destroyed, nothing could cause damage to the body. With the massive amount of vital energy that Han Jin had accumulated, he could already release this ultimate Taoist technique. Perhaps the power was not satisfactory, but it could still increase Han Jin's lethality and defense by several times. Chapter 557. The indestructible golden body stood there proudly. Even the taller Donald could only reach the height of the indestructible golden body's knees, and that was with the two sharp horns on Donald's head. Donald's and Fan Lunding's faces turned solemn. Was this the miracle created by the eighth element? In the face of such an unknown magic system, the two demigod powerhouses did not dare to act rashly. They chose to remain silent at the same time. It was not a wise move to make the first move at such a time, as the enemy might find a flaw. Moreover, since it was magic, it was impossible for it to last forever. Therefore, Donald and Fan Lunding were not afraid of waiting. The longer they delayed, the better. Of course, no one would be so naive as to think that Han Jin summoned such a huge golden figure just for decoration. Therefore, Donald was ready to teleport at any time. If Han Jin stood in place and controlled the indestructible golden body to attack, then Donald's landing point would be beside Han Jin. Donald did not believe that anyone would be able to control something else while under his attack. Fan Lunding had also entered a state of battle readiness. The flames in his eyes were jumping more and more violently. At the same time, the scene around his body suddenly began to blur, as if something was burning silently around him. Layers of heat waves rose, and everyone in the field could feel the indescribable heat. Fan Lunding quietly activated his domain, the flame of the dragon god. This flame that could not be seen by the naked eye had given countless of his opponents a headache. More importantly, when he stopped Han Jin, Fan Lunding did not use the power of his domain. This was enough to show how much importance he attached to Han Jin at this moment. On the contrary, Nicholas and Enkiel were overjoyed. Han Jin's revelation about the eighth element had given them great confidence. Therefore, Nicholas and Enkiel were also waiting for Han Jin to blow the horn to attack. Everyone's eyes were focused on the indestructible golden body standing behind Han Jin. The abyssal demons who were standing further away were also silently calculating the angle of attack and the position of teleportation in their hearts. Even if Han Jin really had the power of a god, even if he would fall in the next moment, he would not be able to stop the abyssal demons from swinging their scythes. The demons could no longer take another step back. Let everything come to an end today, right here, right now. Perhaps that was what Donald thought deep down. Time seemed to have become incomparably long. From the time Han Jin summoned the indestructible golden body to the time he took action, it was only a short period of 10 seconds. However, in the eyes of others, it seemed to have been as long as a century. Finally, Han Jin moved. Han Jin only made 2 simple movements. His body shot forward, and at the same time, the long saber in his hand slashed down, pointing at Black Dragon King Valentine, who was a dozen meters away. At this distance, Han Jin's heavenly Tao was naturally unable to harm Fan Lunding, but his indestructible golden body could. Following Han Jin's movements, the indestructible golden body also took a step forward and slashed down with its saber. The difference was that the indestructible golden body took a step forward and arrived in front of Fan Lunding. The golden saber in its hand had been enlarged several times, and it was as wide as a door plank. With the sound of wind and thunder, it slashed down toward Fan Lunding's head. Although such an attack surprised Fan Lunding, it was destined to be impossible to hit the Black Dragon King, who was a demigod powerhouse. Fan Lunding quickly retreated, and, at the same time, he pushed his right hand forward. A ball of flame that was close to transparent flew toward Han Jin at an even faster speed. Fan Lunding's calculations were very precise. The attack just now was merely a test. As long as it could affect Han Jin even slightly, then what followed would be an earth-shattering blaze. However, he had greatly underestimated the indestructible golden body's power. The golden light split the air and actually let out a shrill whistle that was loud enough to tear apart eardrums. Meanwhile, in front of the indestructible golden body, streams of clearly visible flowing waves suddenly appeared. Moreover, in everyone's line of sight, Fan Lunding, who was behind the flowing waves, had already become distorted. It was as if he was not a real existence, but a reflection on the water's surface, oscillating with the waves. The ball of flame that Fan Lunding released was instantly shattered by the invisible flowing waves. However, he was extremely experienced in battle, and he calmly released his dragon god's flame domain. A ball of flame that was so faint that it was almost transparent had already enveloped his entire body. The next moment, the flowing waves released by the indestructible golden body deeply embedded themselves into Fan Lunding's domain. However, the speed of penetration was fast at first, then slowed down. It was obvious that it had encountered a strong resistance. With the flowing waves and the domain collided, the transparent flames had already turned white. Meanwhile, Fan Lunding's figure quickly retreated, not because he was afraid of Han Jin's indestructible golden body, but because he did not want to be tangled up in a fight with Han Jin. He had only one goal after leaving the Black Dragon Legion and rushing to Grey Valley City, and that was to capture Ankiel. Although he was angry and resentful that Han Jin had inexplicably changed his target to him, he still decided to endure it for now. He did not want to get too involved, and he did not want to become Donald's lackey. If he really wanted to fight to the death with Han Jin, Donald would definitely be the happiest one. In the blink of an eye, Fan Lunding had already retreated more than 100 meters. The flowing waves finally disappeared, and his domain returned to its original state. However, there was a bottomless crack that was more than 100 meters long and a foot wide between him and Han Jin. The solid ground was actually as soft as tofu under the indestructible golden body. Han Jin's eyelids drooped slightly, as if he was an old monk in meditation. However, his demeanor and actions gave off a completely different feeling. The former was extremely calm, while the latter was extremely ferocious. Immediately after, Han Jin's figure leapt into the air like a heavenly rock soaring into the heavens. Then his figure suddenly paused, and he quickly descended again, swinging his blade at Fan Lunding. Compared to the previous strike, Han Jin's movements were slightly slower this time. However, all the powerhouses present knew that this was Han Jin's full-strength attack because of the momentum that could change the color of the sky. Fan Lunding was furious. He would not allow anyone to test his patience again and again. In the next moment, Fan Lunding opened his mouth, and a flame suddenly shot out from his mouth. Many powerhouses believed that a dragon who had used the ultimate transformation technique would not be able to use dragon breath, and even if they did, the power would be greatly reduced. However, this was not correct. At least, to Fan Lunding, it was absurd and laughable. In the instant that Fan Lunding spat out dragon breath, his figure had already disappeared. Compared to dragon breath, a human's figure was pitifully small. The frenzied flames enveloped his entire body. The several hundred-meter-long tongue of flame was like a long sword that stabbed diagonally into the sky, and it instantly closed in on Han Jin. The tumbling flames roared fiercely, as if they wanted to burn everything they came into contact with into ashes. The invincible gilded body's flowing waves collided with the flames, and a series of rumbling sounds came from the sky. Every time a rumbling sound rang out, a ball of flame would blossom in the sky. Under the invincible gilded body's attack, the tongues of flame would scatter in all directions, and some would even shoot out nearly 1,000 meters away. Meanwhile, Fan Lunding's dragon breath suddenly turned into a giant firework, continuously burning away his life force. From Han Jin's attack, to Fan Lunding's dragon breath, to the invincible gilded body slashing at Fan Lunding's domain, only a little more than 2 seconds had passed. The several hundred-meter-long tongues of flame had all been scattered, turning into dozens of blossoming balls of flame. This incomparably rapid change far exceeded what one could see. Only powerhouses like Nikolai could faintly capture the process of the transformation. As for the other abyssal demons, they could only see the fierce tongues of flame suddenly turn into a rain of fire that enveloped an area of 1,000 meters around them. Naturally, the demigod powerhouses did not care about the messy flames, and the abyssal demons quickly flashed towards the outskirts of Grey Valley City. However, the few demon generals that remained below the tower were clearly in a sorry state. They could only continuously swing their scythes, slashing away all the balls of flame that were attacking them. Boom! Another loud sound rang out, and the invincible gilded body heavily collided with Fan Lunding's domain. The next moment, Han Jin's figure flew backwards, and the invincible gilded body was also repelled. Meanwhile, a large part of Fan Lunding's domain had caved in deeply. Fan Lunding's furious response now seemed to be the correct one. This was also his luck. If not for the dragon breath greatly reducing the impact of the invincible gilded body, there was no way he could have repelled Han Jin so easily. Just when Fan Lunding thought that this short exchange had come to an end, a strong sense of danger suddenly surged in his heart. Fan Lunding's expression changed drastically, and he hurriedly retreated once more. However, it was already too late. Just as Fan Lunding's sense of danger appeared, an extremely intense golden light rose from the ground at an unparalleled speed and spread out. When the golden light rose to the surface, Fan Lunding only had time to make a backward movement before his entire body, along with his domain, was engulfed by the light. Only then did the deafening sound of an explosion reach everyone's ears. The speed at which the light spread could not even keep up with the sound. Countless rubble shot up hundreds of meters into the sky like a volcanic eruption. The entire city began to tremble from this earth-shattering attack. The ground beneath everyone's feet cracked, and the zigzagging cracks extended far away. A circular shockwave swept out in all directions. The sky darkened and sand billowed. One after another, houses collapsed and scattered amidst the surging shockwaves. The ruins of Grey Valley City had at least doubled in size. At the center of the explosion, a faint groan could be heard. Then, Fan Lunding's figure could be seen flying out of the golden light. He was so fast that he left behind afterimages in the air. Fan Lunding only stopped after he had retreated 300 to 400 meters away. When the light dissipated, a huge crater with a radius of 100 meters was left on the ground. However, at the center of the crater, a piece of ground miraculously remained intact. That was where Fan Lunding's domain was located. Fan Lunding's lips were tightly shut, and the flames in his eyes flickered violently. He stared at Han Jin with a sinister look in his eyes. Although he tried his best to act as if nothing had happened, the taste of blood in his throat constantly reminded Fan Lunding of the ferocity of the indestructible golden body. However, this was nothing. He had sparred with the fallen angel Catherine a few times. Strictly speaking, Han Jin's attack power was still slightly inferior to Catherine's. However, the problem was that Han Jin was a magician. It was said that Catherine was defeated by Han Jin's magic. If Han Jin's close combat strength was so powerful, how could he deal with the magic released by his opponent? Fan Lunding's guess was not wrong. The indestructible golden body could not only release spells, but could also greatly increase the power of the spells. However, Han Jin cannot do this. It was already very difficult for him to release the indestructible golden body. Moreover, he could not maintain the indestructible golden body for too long. Once his vital energy was exhausted, the indestructible golden body would automatically dissipate. Even a master of Nikolai's level could tell that Han Jin should have a certain advantage in the two short exchanges. As for Han Jin himself, this was his battle of proving the truth. You should be very happy to be able to defeat the Black Dragon King Fan Lunding twice. However, Han Jin's eyes were so calm. There was no sadness, joy, or fear in them. There was no trace of any emotion in his eyes that could be described with words. Lord Raphael, you've angered me, Fan Lunding said coldly. Ankiel opened her mouth. She wanted to say that Fan Lunding was her opponent, but in the end, she did not say it. Han Jin slowly raised his eyes and met Fan Lunding's gaze. After a while, he slowly moved his eyes away and turned to a strange direction. Even Nicolai and the others could not help but follow Han Jin's gaze. However, they could not see anything. In the words of self-cultivators, the indestructible golden body had its own special abilities. Han Jin had to slowly adapt to many things when he first released the indestructible golden body. Just like the 2 times he attacked, although the first attack was fast, the attack power was barely satisfactory. Although the second attack was slower, the attack power was several times stronger than the first. At this moment, Han Jin suddenly discovered through his indestructible golden body that there was a place in the northwest corner of Grey Valley City that was filled with a demonic aura. In comparison, the aura emitted by both Donald and Valentine paled in comparison. Who was that? What was he or they doing? What were they waiting for? Denver. A name popped up in Han Jin's mind. He couldn't forget Catherine's evaluation of Denver. When she mentioned Donald and the Black Dragon King Valentine, Catherine's tone was always indifferent and indifferent. However, when it came to Denver, Catherine became extremely cautious. It was an existence that even Catherine, a fallen angel, had scruples about. The situation seemed to be a little bad. Han Jin slowly lowered his eyes. The next moment, he disappeared from the spot together with the indestructible golden body. Donald's expression changed. As he released the instant transmission, he shouted, "Be careful!" The 5 demon generals heard Donald's warning and immediately released the instant transmission. Han Jin appeared beside them at the same time and swung his saber horizontally. The saber light swept through the air and only scattered the 5 phantoms. The flowing wave that swept past passed through the bottom of the tower. A crack of about 2 meters appeared on the tower, which was dozens of meters thick. Then, the tower slowly fell and crashed to the ground with a boom. No one knew what the tower was made of. The material seemed very heavy, and it actually sank deep into the ground. Han Jin's figure suddenly froze. No one knew what he was thinking. After a moment, he said slowly, "As expected, you can't escape from my heaven's eye." The powerhouses who heard Han Jin's word were puzzled. Heaven's eye? What did that mean? And they couldn't escape? The few demon generals had clearly avoided Han Jin's attack. The few demon generals looked at each other and then shifted their gazes to Han Jin. They were fully alert. Their mission was to restrain Han Jin. But after Han Jin released the indestructible golden body, his attacks released an unparalleled momentum. His eyes showed that he was indifferent to the world. This was a kind of torture to the confidence of the few demon generals. As a result, they didn't dare to pester Han Jin like they had planned. They only carefully guarded against Han Jin. The atmosphere in the field was a little strange. Logically speaking, the powerhouses should be fighting, but Nicholas didn't make a move. His attention wasn't on Donald, but on Han Jin. If this war ended with the victory of the surface races, he would definitely face the threat of Han Jin. Therefore, he had to do everything possible to understand Han Jin. Donald also wasn't in a hurry to make a move. If Han Jin's combat power was far beyond his expectations, then today's battle would become especially dangerous. Should he maintain his strength or forcefully resist? He didn't know which option he should choose. Fan Lunding and Ankiel also had similar thoughts. They also wanted to understand Han Jin. Perhaps they could really find out the secret of the 8th element. Han Jin slowly raised his long blade. He didn't release the ground shrinking spell. Instead, he jumped up and directly shot toward a demon general. That demon general was already prepared. Just as Han Jin's figure moved, he had already released the instant transmission and disappeared from the spot. Han Jin suddenly changed direction and flew toward an open space. His long blade rolled, bringing with it a sharp stream of light. Under the gaze of the indestructible golden body, that demon general had already become two. However, one figure gradually dimmed, while the other figure gradually became clearer. The demon general's reaction speed was very fast. When his figure appeared, the blade light had already reached him. He immediately raised his blood-red scythe and blocked in front of him. With a loud bang, the demon general's figure was sent flying high into the air like a cannonball. Countless metal fragments flew along with him. The demon scythe in his hand was actually shattered by this blow. Many of the fragments were like sharp blades that directly cut into his body, splashing blood in the air. The demon general used all his remaining strength to release the instant transmission in the air. When he appeared again, he couldn't even control his body's balance and fell heavily to the ground. His limbs were twisted at a strange angle, and blood flowed out of his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose like a fountain. Donald didn't need to look to know that Han Jin's seemingly simple sweep had actually shattered all the bones in the demon general's body. The other 4 demon generals appeared at the same time beside the fallen demon general, their expressions extremely sorrowful. A cold light flashed in Fan Lunding's eyes. He couldn't understand how Han Jin could catch the demon general's movements. Nicholas and Ankiel also looked shocked. Although this was very beneficial to them, the enemy made them feel uneasy. An unbalanced power system also made them feel uneasy. Where's the projection of death? It seems the chances of you summoning the projection of death are not high. Han Jin said indifferently, "So, Donald, let him come out. How long do you want to hide it?" Chapter 558. Han Jin's success in killing the demon general had an unparalleled impact on Donald. He did not even think about the meaning of Han Jin's words. His blood-red eyes were fixed on Han Jin. Since Han Jin could capture the demon general's movement trajectory, it meant that the demon race's greatest reliance had lost its effectiveness in front of Han Jin. This was simply a nightmare. Donald's mind was spinning wildly. Heavenly Eye? What the hell is that? Donald had never been as nervous as he was at this moment. The situation in the field had completely changed. Even the Black Dragon King, Fan Lunding's Flame of the Dragon God, which was known for its strong attack and defense, could not gain the upper hand in front of Han Jin's indestructible golden body. This was too surprising for him. Seeing that Donald did not respond, Han Jin slowly raised his long saber and soared into the sky, pouncing on Donald with unparalleled power. Denver's hidden purpose was to wait for the moment when Han Jin and the others were weakened. Although Han Jin could not understand why Donald and Fan Lunding were willing to be the vanguard for Denver, the current situation did not allow him to think too much. There was a limit to the indestructible golden body's existence. He had to kill the enemy's strength to the greatest extent within a limited time. Donald's face tightened, and his figure disappeared from spot. The demon race's defensive ability was not good to begin with. With Fan Lunding's example as an example, Donald was naturally not stupid enough to take Han Jin's attack head-on. Through the indestructible golden body, Han Jin saw that Donald's figure standing in the same spot was rapidly fading. 200 meters away, another Donald's figure was gradually becoming clearer. Han Jin's figure suddenly disappeared, and when Donald reappeared, he also appeared at Donald's side. The long saber in the immortal golden body's hand was wrapped in a powerful force as it slashed down. Donald's death and withering domain was instantly activated. The black screen that spread out appeared sticky and heavy. Even though Donald's surroundings were already filled with flying sand and rocks, the black screen only shook a few times before it returned to normal. Han Jin withdrew his saber and stood in silence, as if he was evaluating Donald's strength. "Human, you're too arrogant." Donald was truly enraged. Han Jin had first attacked the Black Dragon King Valentine, then casually killed a demon general before finally turning his attention to him. What was the meaning of this? This was a blatant provocation. Did he think that he could fight against all the powerhouses in the abyss alone? It's a mess. It's a mess. Nicholas let out a low, strange chuckle before turning to Ankiel. At that moment, Ankiel was also looking at him. Both of them exchanged glances, understood each other's intentions, and launched their attacks at the same time. Hanjin's attack on Donald was much weaker than the previous ones. He didn't seem to have used any strength. Both Nicholas and Ankiel knew that it was just a signal. According to the situation just now, they should be divided into 3 groups: Nicholas against Donald, Ankiel against Valentine, and Hanjin against the Abyssal Demon Generals and hundreds of Abyssal Demons. It was impossible for Donald to allow Hanjin to support the other battlefields. If the Abyssal Demon Generals were killed by Hanjin one after another, the Abyssal Demons would definitely intervene. Hanjin was obviously unwilling to be led by the nose. At this moment, Hanjin used his actions to show that his main targets were Donald and Valentine. Once the battle broke out, he would repeatedly support Nicholas and Ankiel to form a local advantage. As for the Abyssal Demon Generals, he would play with them while he was at it. Ankiel let out a delicate cry and shot towards Black Dragon King Fantine like a bolt of lightning. Her arms were held behind her back like a swallow's. The frigid currents emanating from the deep blue domain froze all the bricks and sand that were affected by the frigid currents, forming a semicircular wall of ice. Moreover, the thickness of the wall of ice was rapidly increasing. It was like a gigantic ice boulder that charged straight towards Fantine. Nicholas also moved. At full speed, he had already turned into a comet, and the rich galaxy-fighting aura left a trail of flame more than 30 meters long behind him. Fan Lunding snorted coldly. His body swayed a little before he shot forward and met Ankiel head-on without fear. The battle between demigods was completely different from that of ordinary professionals. This scene could be described as returning to one's natural state. No matter how exquisite the moves and techniques were, if they could not break the opponent's domain, then it would be meaningless. Asterisk boom. Asterisk amidst the violent explosion. The ice wall that Ankiel had condensed shattered into countless fragments, and then the 2 domains collided heavily. The deep blue water curtain twisted wildly, and the flame of the dragon god released by Valentine, which was originally close to being transparent, turned white under the impact of the cold air. At this moment, a golden light quietly passed through the scattered ice rain and struck down from the sky, blasting toward Valentine. Asterisk boom. Asterisk a circular shockwave spread out like a tsunami from the point of impact, and the flame of the dragon god released by Valentine had turned into an incomparably blazing sun, completely engulfing Valentine's figure. However, both Hanjin and Ankiel heard Valentine's muffled groan. Hanjin's movements were untraceable, and there were no elemental fluctuations. Moreover, he had Ankiel's cover, so this sudden attack caused Valentine to suffer a hidden loss. Moreover, no matter how powerful a domain was, it still had its limits. Furthermore, Hanjin and Ankiel's coordination was extremely tight. Even if Valentine's strength was far greater than Ankiel's, he could not withstand 2 consecutive heavy blows in less than a second. A trace of a smile appeared in Ankiel's eyes. In fact, when she saw Valentine taking the initiative to meet the attack and Donald standing still, waiting for Nicholas to approach, she knew that Hanjin would definitely support her first. The next moment, Ankiel opened her mouth, and a snow-white pillar of air gushed out, colliding with Valentine's flame of the dragon god. Frost breath. This was another one of Ankiel's consummate skills. Pure white frost spread out at an extremely fast speed, hundreds of meters, thousands of meters. In just a few seconds, the entire Gray Valley City had turned into a world of ice and snow, and even the abyssal demons watching the battle from afar were covered in frost. As for the flame of the dragon god, which was facing the frost breath head-on, the scorching white flames had turned fiery red in an instant, and it was constantly retreating. At the same time that Ankiel released the frost breath, Hanjin's figure had borrowed the rebound force to rise into the air again, and the longsword in the invincible golden body's hand was also raised little by little. Looking at its posture, it seemed that the longsword condensed from golden light had suddenly become extraordinarily heavy. And when Ankiel's frost breath was exhausted, and Valentine's flame of the dragon god was completely covered in a layer of ice, turning into a semicircular ice ball. The invincible golden body's long sword swung down once more. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the thick layer of ice shattered in an instant, and then frantically surging elemental turbulence swept out in all directions. Not only was Gray Valley City trembling, but some unknown vegetation outside the city was also swaying wildly, and there were even piles of gravel rolling down from the mountaintops. And where the elemental turbulence swept past, the frost rapidly dissolved, and Valentine, with blood dripping from the corner of his mouth, appeared, staggering backwards. In just 4 attacks, Hanjin and Ankiel had jointly launched 4 attacks, and the flame of the dragon god that Valentine relied on to rampage across the continent had collapsed. Compared to Donald and Valentine, Hanjin's advantage did not lie in their numbers or their outstanding strength, but in their ability to truly cooperate. On the other hand, Donald and Valentine were wary of each other and were dissatisfied with each other, so there was no way for them to cooperate at all. Ankiel took the initiative to launch an attack to attract Valentine's attention, and when Hanjin took over, she believed that Hanjin could restrain Valentine, so she had enough time to release her strongest frost breath. And Hanjin also believed that Ankiel would not give Valentine a chance to catch his breath, so he chose to unscrupulously circulate his ki to the extreme. Sometimes, 1 + 1 did not equal 2. Hanjin and Ankiel's tacit understanding had already formed an absolute, overwhelming advantage. At the same time Hanjin swung his blade, Ankiel stretched out her white fingertips and drew a circle in the air. With a push of her hand, a giant icicle more than 20 meters long suddenly appeared and chased after Valentine at lightning speed. Ankiel knew that it was impossible to injure Fan Lunding, who was immune to magic, with normal magic. She had to use elemental materialization magic. However, after 2 consecutive full-power attacks, her mental strength was too tense. The icicles were the limit of her ability. Of course, if she was given a little more time, she would be able to return to her peak state. Fan Lunding, on the other hand, was in a much more miserable state. Fan Lunding let out an angry roar. His sorrow was that he did not have the time to breathe. When the previous attack arrived, the next attack was already brewing. While he was fighting against the power released by his opponent that caused the world to change color, the next attack was about to arrive. He could not dodge or retreat and could only take it head-on. At this time, the 4 abyssal demon generals finally reacted. They did not want to get close to Ankiel, but the situation was beyond their control. They could only quickly release instant transmission and close in on Hanjin and Ankiel. If Valentine was defeated and fled, then the fate of the demons could be imagined. Hanjin suddenly turned around, and the long sword in his invincible golden body slashed out a stream of light, sweeping towards an empty space. Ankiel also turned around and pointed with her index finger, and a wave of blue light flashed across Hanjin's body. A demon general appeared in front of the stream of light from the invincible golden body. He did not dodge, but instead roared and swung his blood-red scythe, as if he wanted to perish together with Hanjin. Hanjin's movements were fast, but the demon general's movements did not seem to be any slower than Hanjin's. They did not have the power of domains, so their instant transmission was smoother, faster, and sharper. In fact, it was already very commendable that their attack speed was comparable to Hanjin's great success sword force. The stream of light from the invincible golden body flashed past the demon general's waist, and the blood-red scythe shot out also hit Hanjin's forehead. The demon general's body was split in 2, and dazzling flowers of blood sprayed out. Hanjin's invincible golden body flickered, and then the blood-red scythe was bounced away by an indescribable force. If it was in the past, Hanjin would never have dared to fight an abyssal demon like this. After all, his faked Earth corpse could only give him a one-time guarantee, and it could not be wasted. When the other 3 demon generals saw that one of their companions had fallen, their hair and beard stood on end, and they simultaneously released instant transmission. It was obvious that they were going to attack Hanjin with all their might. At this time, Ankiel had just retracted her finger from Hanjin and then pushed with the back of her hand, and a blue brilliance surged forward like a tide, enveloping Hanjin. As soon as the 4 demon generals who had teleported over appeared, they were all trapped in the blue light curtain. Ankiel's timing of activating her domain was just right. The 4 demon generals roared repeatedly, but they were firmly trapped by the seemingly weak brilliance and could not move at all. Pieces of sparkling blue ice gradually appeared on the surface of their bodies, and when these ice surfaces connected, even if Donald rushed over, he would not be able to save them. One of the demon generals suddenly let out an extremely desperate roar, and his body rapidly swelled like a balloon. Immediately, the sound of ice shattering rang out from the blue light curtain, and when his body swelled to the limit, it finally exploded with a boom, and countless pieces of flesh and blood splattered in all directions. The self-destruction at such a close distance caused Ankiel's expression to change slightly. She raised her hand and set up a blue barrier around herself and Hanjin, blocking the blood mist that filled the sky outside. Although it did not harm Hanjin and Ankiel, the self-destruction of the demon generals had finally succeeded in causing the blue light curtain to tremble. If the other 2 demon generals had seized the opportunity to release instant transmission, they would have been able to escape from the range of the deep blue domain. However, Hanjin was not a decoration, absolutely not. The moment the 3 demon generals turned into ice sculptures, Hanjin had already shot out and even forcibly broke through the blue barrier that Ankiel had set up for him. He did not need it. Strictly speaking, this was the only flaw in the perfect cooperation between Hanjin and Ankiel, which was as quick as lightning and as quick as lightning. The streams of light scattered by the indestructible golden body enveloped everything within a radius of dozens of meters. Before the 2 demon generals could release instant transmission, 2 huge heads had already been sent flying into the air. On the other side, Fantine had already been sent flying by the giant icicle. The scene of the collision this time was very spectacular. Ice shards flew everywhere, and the rumbling of the collision was incessant. But in reality, this was the lightest blow to Fantine. However, because Donald had already caused all the spatial elements in the surroundings to become chaotic, and the demon's instant transmission was an innate talent, it was not affected. Fantine could no longer control the spatial elements, and because the force of the collision was too great, he could not help but fly backwards. When the demon generals were wiped out in the blink of an eye under the joint attack of Hanjin and Ankiel, Fantine had already shot out from the ruins 600 to 700 meters away, roaring as he charged towards Hanjin and Ankiel. Hanjin heaved a long sigh of relief. Carefree. It was really too carefree. Before he really took action, he did not expect to be able to defeat Fantine and kill the 4 demon generals so easily. If this was a great contribution, then he could only take half of it, and the other half would undoubtedly belong to Ankiel. Without her help, he definitely would not have been able to do this. Hanjin's eyes slowly drifted towards Ankiel. He had an indescribable feeling in his heart. Ankiel was also looking at Hanjin. He did not know how she felt about this result. When their gazes met, Ankiel's long eyelashes flickered, and then her gaze drifted towards Nicola's battle in the distance. She then turned around and went straight to Fantine. Hanjin knew what Ankiel meant. Hanjin did not need to worry about this side. Ankiel was confident that she could deal with the injured Fantine, or at least not lose. However, another thought came to Hanjin's mind. If he fought side by side with Sunir and Yelena, it would be normal for them to cooperate well because they had been together for a long time. But in fact, he always chose to fight alone in the Holy Crown City. Why could he understand Ankiel's thoughts just by looking at her? And Ankiel did not disappoint him. Was it because Ankiel was born to be considerate? Or was it because he did not care about Ankiel's life and death? So he fought side by side with her without any worries? However, it was obviously not the time for him to think about this. Hanjin glanced at the corpses of the demon generals and said, "The shadow of death." Ha! I don't know whether I'm too lucky or you're too unlucky. As soon as he finished speaking, Hanjin's figure had already disappeared. In the encirclement formed by hundreds of abyssal demons, a lame great demon suddenly sighed and said, "It's my turn." After saying that, he limped forward, which was somewhat redundant. No matter if his leg was injured or he was born disabled, it would not affect his talent. "Your Highness!" Several abyssal demons could not help but exclaim. That lame great demon looked back and glanced around. He smiled again and took a few steps that seemed to be a little difficult. Nicholas and Donald were locked in battle. The fighting styles of the two masters were very different. Nicholas's palms were like two sharp swords that emitted sword light. Every time he waved them, he would release an extremely fast and invincible sword light. In other words, his whole body was a sword, and he was constantly trying to get closer to Donald. Donald kept circling around Nikolai. It seemed that his death and decay could not gain an advantage in the head-on collision between domains. His attack frequency was very low, far less than Nikolai's wave after wave of attacks. However, every time he waved his scythe, Nikolai's attack would be interrupted, forcing Nikolai to use his Star River combat chi to block it. If Nicholas's movements were wild, bold, and domineering like a fierce tiger, then Donald would be a poisonous snake. When a poisonous snake was hit, its skin would be torn open, and when a tiger was bitten by a poisonous snake, it would not be any better. However, from a psychological point of view, Nicholas had the absolute advantage. No matter what would happen to him and Hanjin in the future, in this abyssal world, they would definitely work together to resist the enemy. Donald, on the other hand, had to pay attention to the movements of the other battlefields at all times because he knew that if they really fell into a situation of defeat, Fan Lunding would not care whether the Demon Mountain fell or not. He would definitely escape alone. Donald's strength was almost the same as Nicholas, and he had to divide his attention to observe the other battlefields. Naturally, he could not be compared to Nicholas, who was going all out. Choosing to fight was also a last resort. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.